All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We are welcome to the House Economic Matters Committee. It is Thursday, February 25th, and we have several bills today. Here's the order that we are going to take. We're actually going to start with House Bill 1251. We'll then move to House Bill 1231, then House Bill 613, House Bill 220, House Bill 1007, and then House Bill 1304. We also have House Bill 1275, and we may slip that in. It only has one witness, but Delegate Lasanti is testifying in another committee. So with that, do we have Delegate Washington with us? Delegate Washington? Apparently he's coming. Delegate Brooks, are you here?
Yes, I am, Madam Vice Chair.
And are your witnesses around, or we'll check the waiting room and get people here?
I think they are. Yeah. Hold on.
Start with 1231.
Yes.
Okay, ready when you are.
Okay, all righty. Madam Vice Chair and members of my esteemed committee, I thank you for the opportunity to testify before you on HB 1231. That's a Public Service Commission damaged, obsolete, or excessive line fines. The purpose of this bill is to require the Public Service Commission to notify a utility pole owner about lines deemed damaged, dangling, obsolete, or a public nuisance due to excessive amount of power lines. The owner will be given 30 days to repair or remove the offending line. And after receiving notice, and if the pole is not attached, if the pole is not attended to within the 90 days of receiving this notice, the owner shall face a fine of $250 for each day of non-compliance. Damaged and obsolete power lines are not only unsightly, but can also be dangerous, potential fire hazards in numerous alleyways and streets around our state. Some of these black wires dangling low enough to catch a person's under the chin. These wires stand in the way of clean up and revitalization projects and serves as an altogether public nuisance. The inattentiveness to these lines leave residents in the neighborhoods feeling abandoned in their own homes while they could see them from their windows. Too often, companies will run new wires without removing the old or redundant wires. Dormant telephone lines have apparently been left in places for years. Often you'll see the old wires or cables hanging from poles or tangled with live lines, including power lines. Currently, in Maryland, the Public Service Commission has only limited authority to make cable and power companies address these concerns. Telecommunications and utility companies will often point the finger at each other, but we need to put the onus on someone to take responsibility for removing these lines. Companies consistently shift the blame as whose wires they are and their ability to force another company to remove their lines. However, utility companies own the power pole and contract with these other companies to rent space on their poles. HB 1231 places accountability on the pole owners to ensure that these lines are addressed in a timely manner. For that reason, I request a favorable report. Okay.
All right.
Madam Chair, you can go from your list of the people who are testifying on behalf and against.
Sure.
Okay.
I actually only have unfavorables signed up. So if we can go to Tom Dennison to start. All right, I don't see Tom yet. How about Ivan Lanier?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, and to members of the Economic Matters Committee as well. My name is Ivan K. Lanier on behalf of PEPCO and Delmarva Power and Light in opposition to House Bill 1231, Public Service Commission damage, obsolete or excessive lines and fines. Just of particular concern is the onerous nature of the penalties outlined in the legislation. If the offending line or lines are not repaired or removed within 90 days after the commission notification to the owner of the utility pole, the commission is required to impose a fine on the owner of the utility pole of $250 for each day of noncompliance. Utility pole owners aren't necessarily qualified, nor are they authorized to repair other parties' lines. We think that the bill unfairly holds the utility pole owner responsible when an entity is unwilling or unable to address legitimate issues caused by an entity that does not own the utility poles. Madam Vice Chair, I come today and I would like to introduce our subject matter expert on this issue, Daniel Guy, who's the manager of Smart Grid and Innovation for PHI, who I've asked to testify as a subject matter expert on behalf of PEPCO and Delmarva Power and Light today on this bill. Can I ask him to testify now?
Yes, absolutely. Mr. Guy?
Thank you, Ivan. Just some points I'd like to make out. First of all, safety to the public and our employees. That's a core value, and we're concerned with the safety issues that can arise from dangling wires, especially if there are electric facilities. We certainly don't want to get anybody hurt from that. You know, and just from a background perspective, poles are owned by both PHI and Verizon in our Maryland territory. And under the FCC regulations, we're mandated to provide access to our poles for joint use, which is why there may be multiple communication companies such as Verizon, Comcast, Atlantic Broadband, Crancastle, et cetera, attached. And we don't have the ability to require an attaching company to get off the pole, nor do we as the electric company have the right or ability to repair or remove such attachments. Some of the other concerns, pole owner will need to field the pole in question to determine which attaching company is causing the problem, or send out a notification to all the attachers on the pole to go out and determine who is causing the equipment problem. Enforcing the attaching company to make repairs to sagging lines within 90 days, that's going to be very difficult to do. As I said before, we can't remove or repair lines we do not own. Upgrading, relocating, placing underground electric facilities or probably the other communication equipment attached, that can become very expensive, which these costs will then be passed on to our ratepayers. 90 days to repair, upgrade, relocate, remove is simply not a sufficient amount of time to design, procure materials, procure appropriate permits, et cetera. I think the best way to tackle this is to have a working group with all the parties, pole owners and attachers at the table to work on a solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's hear from Mr. Dennison. I just let him in. At least I thought I did. Tom Dennison?
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Tom Dennison with Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative, here also in opposition to this bill. I won't repeat what was mentioned already by Mr. Lanier and his subject matter expert, but I can tell you on behalf of SMECO that we have a system in place that is an online platform. It's a nationally recognized joint use platform that notifies all of the people, all of the companies involved with attaching to our poles, whether that's Comcast, Verizon, or any of the like, to know when work has been done on the pole and when they should follow up with that work. So if we replace a pole and they're attached to that pole, they're notified and they follow up accordingly. And we can track how long those work requests are. So we do have that system in place. We feel like it's working pretty well in Southern Maryland. And so the bill, I think, has the intent of the bill makes sense, but the practicality of finding a company like SMECO that has the ownership of the poles when the work that has to be done on the poles isn't our responsibility seems a little unfair and very potentially very costly to us. So again, we look forward to working with the sponsor of the bill on this, and we would certainly be willing to continue to work in concert to solve this issue. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We're going to take one more witness and then we'll move to questions. Allison Black.
Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair and members of the committee. I'm Allison Black Woodson here on behalf of BGE, respectfully in opposition to HB 1213, HB 1231. And also, BGE does understand the concerns regarding unsightly telecommunication lines attached to our utility poles, and we are particularly concerned about the safety issues that can result from those lines, including when we are attempting to access our poles and to restore electric service to our customers or to establish new service. However, as stated, this bill is not, as drafted, is not the way to accomplish the end goal of enhancing safety and improving aesthetics. The bill does place responsibility for resolving these concerns on the utility pole owner, as opposed to the actual responsible party, specifically the attaching telecommunication companies. And under federal law, BGE must afford telecommunication companies the right to attach their facilities onto our utility poles. So the bill improperly suggests that the utility pole owner would have the ability and absolute authority to require another company to repair or remove their lines in all circumstances, and this is just not the case. Currently, BGE can notify a company of its need to remove or repair lines in a timely fashion. However, we don't have the absolute authority to ensure that that actually happens. So establishing a law that penalizes the company for its inability to regulate the behavior of another company would be misplaced policy from our perspective. We do think that there certainly should be an opportunity to look into this, but we think the most appropriate way is to bring all the parties together to develop a workable solution that includes the utilities or the pole owners, that includes the telecommunications companies, the Public Service Commission, but we don't think that this is the appropriate vehicle to address this issue. I do have with me our subject matter experts that can go into a little bit more detail in terms of how BGE is currently addressing this issue, if there's time. If not, they are certainly here for questions, to answer questions.
All right, is that Mr. Krieger?
That's Mr. Damon Krieger, as well as Mr. Andrew Kraft. And I would start with Andrew Kraft, actually.
Okay, Mr. Kraft.
Hi, my name is Andrew Kraft, Senior Real Estate Representative and Pole Attachments at BGE.
Mr. Kraft, can you get a little closer to your mic? We're having a hard time hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Andrew Kraft, Senior Real Estate Representative and Pole Attachments at BGE. Currently, BGE also has an internally developed notification system called Pole Activity Report. It allows us to coordinate and communicate projects with Verizon and our other third-party attaching companies. Our successful pole activity report system can be summarized in a recent effort to remove legacy doublewood poles identified prior to November 2013. So a doublewood pole is a situation where we replace a utility pole, we transfer all the BG equipment to the new pole, we top the old pole, and this allows Verizon to come out, transfer their communications equipment, and to remove what's left of the old pole. So as of March 29th, 2019, all identified legacy doublewood poles have been removed successfully from BGE's territory. BGE is unique since BGE jointly owns utility poles with Verizon based on the height of each pole and where Verizon attaches their wires at. BGE has a total of 359,293 poles. About 80% of those are jointly owned with Verizon. In Baltimore City, where most of these issues the bill states are located, BGE has 87,611 poles, and 83% of those are jointly owned with Verizon. So in the fourth quarter of 2020, we recognized that there was a public concern. We used an outside contractor to perform a sample pole audit of 10,000 of those poles, Baltimore City and the surrounding areas, that focused on excess wires. And so the result of that, we found that 41 of these 10,000 sample poles were determined to have excess wires. BGE will be engaging with Verizon and other attachers to resolve these excess wire locations to the extent that they pose safety or reliability concerns. Verizon and other attachers will be required to correct the situation under the attachment agreements with BGE. So BGE looks forward to continuing our relationship with Verizon and other attachers in order to remove doublewood poles and any other issues that might arise, like removing excess wires without the need for legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Krieger, did you have anything to add?
Thank you and good afternoon, Madam for the committee. I'm Damon Krieger, and I'm the Director of Support Services at Baltimore Gas and Electric Company. Among other things, I have responsibility for overseeing the group that manages third-party attachments to our utility poles. And let me just begin by reiterating our commitment to working with all of the telecom companies, especially Verizon, to help address public concerns with excessive communication lines and equipment on our utility poles. As Mr. Kraft already indicated, about 80% of our poles are jointly owned with Verizon. And so that presents especially an important partnership opportunity with Verizon, given that joint ownership status. The partnership that BGE formed with Verizon in particular to resolve the double pole concerns was very successful. And we believe a similar tactic will work here as well. And at the end of the day, such a partnership will better accomplish the goals of improving safety, reliability, and improving the aesthetics, particularly around areas in which there are an excessive amount of wires currently present than the path outlined in House Bill 1231. As Mr. Kraft also previously discussed, we've already started an initiative to identify excessive telecommunication attachments in our service territory, and with an initial focus on Baltimore City. The next step for us will be to engage directly with Verizon and other telecoms to develop a plan and timeline for resolving these excessive wire conditions. We're also open to expanding the existing pole activity reporting system, which provides notification to the telecoms to ensure that there is a formal and systematic way of ensuring that they have timely notification of potential safety, reliability, and aesthetic concerns related to excessive wires. Thank you for your time, and happy to answer any questions that you may have for the community.
All right. Thank you. And I actually moved rather quickly. Did anyone have questions for Delegate Brooks? I see no questions for Delegate Brooks, but Delegate Brooks, I assume you have questions for some of the utilities.
Yes, Madam Chair, I do. Yeah. And yeah, Mr. Krieger, you said you've already started an initiative to address these concerns. That was started when, sir? And
good afternoon, Delegate Brooks. So we began an initiative back in, we really started it toward the beginning of 2020, so last year. But we launched it officially in the September-October timeframe when we did a sample audit of about 10,000 poles in our service territory with a focus on Baltimore City and some surrounding areas. And through that sampling, we identified 41 locations in particular, and Verizon was the main attacher in these locations where there was an excessive amount of wires as compared to other urban environments, in particular across the country. Many other locations were identified that were more normative when looking across the country, but the audit, at least this preliminary audit, did identify certain excessive locations. And so that's where there's a real opportunity to partner with Verizon to try to resolve some of these issues that are facing the communities that have to stare at them.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, I hear your opposition, and I'm willing to work with you because the ultimate goal is to address these particular concerns, and they are concerns because they're coming from the ratepayers and the people who you service. So that's the ultimate goal. The goal is not to penalize and to try to cause you additional expenditures, but at the same time, it's to address these issues. And from what I've heard, what my research has revealed is that seems as though the buck keeps getting passed. We own the pole, we jointly own the pole. This is not a PSC issue. This is a FCC issue. And here again, the ultimate goal of the bill is to provide to address the concerns by the ratepayers of the people in those various communities where these poles are creating some problems and some issues. Yeah.
Thank you. And again, we
go ahead. I'm sorry. Go right ahead, Mr. Krieger.
Oh, no, I apologize. And again, just to reiterate, we certainly acknowledge that there are legitimate concerns here. but believe that a partnership is the best way to address those concerns. Again, it worked very well with the double poles, which was a situation created as a result of the joint ownership with Verizon and ensuring that we had timely transition of assets from one pole to the other. And we believe a similar partnership will be effective here.
Yeah, Mr. Krieger, I do have another question. Now, on those particular poles that are owned by the utility company, BGE, is there a fee? Is there a contract with the telecommunications company for attachments?
Yes, there is. We have an attachment agreement with all of our attaching parties. And so that regulates the terms and conditions of attachments, but the fee is regulated through a formula set by the FCC. And so at the end of the day, that formula rate is really designed to ensure that our customers, our electric customers, are not subsidizing the telecom companies. And so it's really a marginal cost of recovery, but there is an agreement in place. And the agreement, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say the agreement does afford us some ability to ensure that attachments are done safely and properly maintained in a way to ensure that they don't hinder the reliability of our electric system. What we can't do is we can't prevent somebody from attaching in the first instance. That's what's regulated on the federal.
Now, does that agreement include anything about removal if need be?
Only to the extent it would pose an immediate safety concern. And that's really the challenge here. You could have dangling wires, you could have a lot of wires, excess wires, but they don't necessarily pose an immediate safety concern. And that's why we think the partnership is the best way to recognize the aesthetic aspects that are certainly of concern, and rightfully so, by the public.
Okay. And when you say a partnership, would you explain that to me in the committee, exactly what you're talking about?
Sure. So I think what we would propose is in a similar fashion to what we achieved with the double pole situation, creating whether it's a formal working group or a reach out through BGE and the other utilities directly to the telecoms and Verizon in particular, to create a framework for addressing any concerns that come in through the public related to excessive wire conditions, and making sure that framework has a timeline for rectifying the situation, be it removal of abandoned wires, be it reattaching them so they're not dangling, but again, with an aim toward making sure that concerns of the public are properly addressed. But at the end of the day, the attachers own the equipment, and they are the ones that are in the position to rectify the situation directly and most timely.
Okay. All right. All right. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Madam
Sorry.
Vice Chair,
Yes.
This is Allison Black-Woodson. I just wanted to make note, I believe the Public Service Commission also signed up to testify
I see
on this
that.
bill. Okay.
Any other questions for the witnesses so far? All right, seeing none, actually, let's go to Sean Mooney.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members. of-
Looney, sorry, I'm not reading well today.
Yep, Sean Looney from Comcast, and I won't beat a dead horse unconscious here. I want to thank Delegate Brooks for his willingness to work with industry on this. We certainly understand and appreciate the intent of the legislation, but there's so much complication here. There are federal standards, federal electric standards. The FCC is involved. In the case of Comcast, we have franchise agreements that get involved here. So I think the work group is the best way to proceed here. Let's sit down, roll up our sleeves. We did this before on double poles. This has been mentioned. I was part of that work group, and we took care of a pretty big backlog of double poles working together. We took care of that pretty quickly. So I think we can do the same here. So we all agree that, we don't like a lot of excess wires, but sometimes there are reasons for that. An example is an apartment building where you have tenants that come in and out and change service. Comcast wants to keep a line there. Verizon wants to keep a line there. So whoever chooses, the service will have the service ready to go quickly and easily. So, but I still think we can sit down and work this out. So hopefully the sponsor will be willing to let us do that. So, but he certainly got our attention. Nothing like a piece of legislation to get people's attention. And you got that done, Delegate Brooks, but we'll just figure this out. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Right, Joey Chen,
Good afternoon, Madam Vice Chair and members of the committee. My name is Joey Chen, Senior Advisor to PSC Chairman Jason Stanek, and I'd like to just take some time to focus my testimony on reinforcing some of the points you've heard today and some of the issues with regard to House Bill 1231. You heard that Delegate Brooks had mentioned an FCC issue, and this is an important threshold issue of jurisdiction for the commission, because while the commission has jurisdiction over poles that are owned by electric utilities, the PSC does not have jurisdiction over the wires that are attached to those poles that are unrelated to electric service. And the most common examples of this are the telecommunication lines that you see belonging to Verizon, Comcast, and AT&T. In Maryland, these attachments are regulated by the FCC, not the commission. However, the bill does propose actions have to be taken with regard to offending lines, but the PSC may not have jurisdiction to enforce that. For Maryland to step into this space, to regulating dangling lines, we would have to certify to the FCC that we can regulate and that there are specific criteria that would need to be met under federal law. I won't go too much into the public safety issue because I think you've heard from the utilities about their core value on reinforcing safety. I just mentioned that there is already a mechanism in place for reporting down and damaged and dangling wires. And the PSC should not get involved with this direct communication process, especially when the PSC is not a 24/7 operation. And further, the PSC may not even know which utility owns the poles. And even though pole numbers might help or will help identify the right owner, callers may not always provide this information. The last point I want to make, Madam Vice Chair, is that 1231 does raise questions of fairness because the bill does place responsibility and ultimate liability on the pole owner to require another company to take corrective action. And one of the things that we find lacking in the bill is a critical procedural protection that would allow or provide the owner with the opportunity to respond to the complaint. So for these reasons, the PSC respectfully requests that the committee grant House Bill 1231 an unfavorable report. But if the committee is inclined to proceed with the bill, the commission asks that the committee consider our proposed amendments or in the alternative to convene the work group to further examine the issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Vice Chair Dumais, and hello, members of the committee. For the record, Lisa Smith, Director of Legislative Affairs for the Maryland Public Service Commission. I'll be very brief, just to follow up on Mr. Chen's testimony. I just wanted to thank the sponsor, Delegate Brooks, for starting this conversation. We do understand, as a public agency charged with many utility issues, we do understand that residents confront issues related to tree trimming, construction, safety, nuisance, et cetera, because of excess or unused wires. In our experience, often when the regulated utilities go out to investigate such claims, it turns out that such wires that are causing problems for the residents do not belong to the utility, and they basically tag them and are unable to do anything further. So we do understand and appreciate the issues that Delegate Brooks has raised, that there are identification issues to identify the owner of both the pole and the problematic wires. And ultimately, there is a goal of removing certain problematic wires, such as a wire that has grown into a tree or something like that, or is dangling in the alley and is no longer connected to anything and hasn't been cut or removed or disposed of. So in short, we do agree with BG&E. It'll be good to continue this conversation and find a solution, look further at local, state, and federal jurisdiction. Just because we're not the proper jurisdiction, doesn't mean that we don't want to be part of the conversation. And we did look at this bill from a workability perspective or a technical and legal perspective. So hopefully we can find either a voluntary solution by all of the companies involved or find some other mechanism that will be workable. And we're happy to work with you. And that's it. Thank you.
Delegate Brooks, did you have another question?
Yeah, and perhaps, Lisa, if you will, if you could explain to the committee those poles that are jointly owned, would the PSC have any obligation or any authority there? Just for the benefit of just letting us know exactly where that authority or that jurisdiction ends.
So the short answer, Delegate Brooks, is a great question. The short answer is that the state has not elected to certify with the FCC or the federal government for state regulation of joint polls. And that would be a much larger endeavor and policy conversation that certainly we'd be glad to be a part of. But I will defer. Joey, would you like to add on? May I defer to Joey to add any
Yep.
kind of?
Thank you, Lisa. Just to clarify the one little detail, Delegate Brooks, that PSC does have jurisdiction over polls that are jointly owned, but just looking at the poll itself, the same limitation, however, with respect to the poll attachment, the wire that would be attached to that poll is the same, regardless of, if the poll is solely owned by the utility or jointly owned with the telco company. The PSC does not have jurisdiction over the actual poll attachment if it's not related to electric service. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Okay. All right. Thanks, Madam Chair.
All right. I have one question. Mr. Chen, you mentioned in your testimony that there is a standard procedure or process for reporting trouble with a pole or wires, and if I, as a resident, have a problem, where do I go? If I see I see wires I don't think are correct, or I think a pole is not being kept the way it should be, who do I call?
That's a great question, Madam Vice Chair. And I think here it'd be helpful to distinguish between two scenarios. The first one being a matter of public safety and reliability. If there's a question that the pole could be energized, that is a first call role for the utility to serve, and they've spent significant amounts of money on this type of wires down advertising. But for all the other, I guess, issues, concerns that citizens may have about a wire, again, it's not clear whether or not the nature of the wire, of the ownership of the wire, if it belongs to the utility or the telecommunication company, for example. The public can still file a complaint with the Public Service Commission's Consumer Affairs Division, CAD, and our regulated dispute resolution process administered through CAD will facilitate an investigation, will communicate with the utility, and there is that built-in process that allows the utility to, put the onus on them to respond to a complaint, to provide the PSC and to the complainant with information about this pole to the extent that the utility knows. Now, it may very well be, Madam Vice Chair, that the information that comes back to the utility is such that it's not our line, it's not our equipment, it's not our asset, and then we sort of do find ourselves in a situation back here. So I think that there is, from what you've heard from the utilities, there is value in carrying on this dialogue to figure out a course of action or process for resolving those types of complaints, where you find yourself in this space where the utility has either tagged the line or has already identified it as not an electric service line, and then what? I think that's a good question and a good issue that warrants a full vetted discussion with everyone at the table, including our third party poll attachers.
Okay, thank you. Delegate Branch.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's kind of right along the lines of the Vice Chair, similar question. Okay, so who does have the responsibility, if you don't, of the jointly owned polls? Who, or is there no authority?
Delegate Branch, may I answer that? Is that a question for PSC?
Yes.
Thank you. Oh, thank you, Vice Chair Dumais. The answer is, so just to clarify, and this goes back to Delegate Brooks' question as well, we need to distinguish between who has jurisdiction over the polls and then who has jurisdiction over the connections or the wires. So just to be clear, yes, if they are regulated utility-owned polls, that is the subject of many proceedings and reporting requirements and work groups that we've had and regulations. There's many things that folks can call in to our CAD complaint process. And
Well, it shouldn't be that way. I mean, I don't know. And we have authority over everything except for something like this. It's simple polls.
Right.
It doesn't make much sense to me in saying that there are so many other little things that you have to account for in order to figure out who, and you still don't know who, because you would naturally say, well, it would be us, or it would be BG&E, or it would be someone else. But evidently, there is no answer.
Delegate Branch, we do have jurisdiction over the polls. The connections are, if they're connections and wires that belong to telecommunications companies, it's federal law, and there's, it's not in state jurisdiction. There's federal law on those attachments. For example, federal law requires that the regulated utilities allow the attachments, for example, but there's other rules. There is not a lot of regulation at the federal level. So I think that's what we're finding here. There's a gap. There's not a consumer affairs process like we have at the Public Service Commission that's quite as responsive and friendly and helpful maybe at the FCC. Does that make sense? So the problem here is there is a gap. It's federal jurisdiction, and we don't legally have the authority to ask Comcast or Verizon or a company like that to remove a wire. We just don't have legal authority. It's not even, our choice. So I don't know if that helps answer your question.
Well, kind of, and it leads to the next question. So are you guys okay with dangling wires? I mean, it's just a question. Are you okay with that, or what's your remedy? Because some people live in these neighborhoods. I understand what Delegate Brooks is trying to do. So these wires are just hanging, and I'm sure they don't look too nice just hanging around. I know I wouldn't want it hanging around my backyard or in my front of my house. So are you okay with that, or who does he look to, Delegate Brooks, look to remedy that? I mean, somebody's got to have an answer to that. I mean, this is not the first time you've heard this issue, I'm sure.
And Delegate Branch, I could not agree with you more, and that's why I made sure to express in my testimony that I completely understand the issue. I live here in Baltimore City, and I'm looking out my window right now. I can see dangling wires. So Delegate Brooks was kind enough to discuss this with us. I completely understand the issue. And I agree that we need to find a solution and look at what can be done. If there are some issues with state and federal jurisdiction, we can talk about that. Perhaps there's some remedies on the local jurisdictions. Perhaps we can bring the counties in. I know that these companies have to have franchises. It's a very complex area. So I don't know that I can answer right in this moment. If you'd like us to get back with you with some additional information from our technical experts, I'd be happy to do so, but it's kind of just outside our jurisdiction right now, but we're happy to do the research and come back with more information.
And my last question, Madam Chair, normally I'm not this long-winded, but shouldn't the companies whose wires that are the low-hanging wires, shouldn't those companies like the Comcast or whoever else uses the lower end of the pole, if those wires are hanging, shouldn't they be responsible for their wire?
I think that's absolutely right. And what I'm understanding the problem is that if I as a resident see the dangling wire, I don't know who to call. And so I think the frustration is folks are feeling like, well, I don't know whose wire this is, so I have to call every company and ask who it belongs to. And so I understand that's part of the frustration. And we proposed some amendments in our written testimony that we think would solve that aspect, the identification and notification. The one piece that we just cannot figure out is the enforcement, because the regulated utilities are saying that legally their contracts don't allow them to remove the wires. So again, our amendments would absolutely address that issue, and as far as identification, notification, but I'm concerned that even if we do all that and our consumer affairs division contacts the utility with the consumer complaint and the utility contacts the telecommunications company, the concern is then what? And we really want residents to be satisfied. We want to solve the actual issue. So we're right there with you and completely hear what you're saying.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you. Delegate Brooks, did you have another question or just?
Yeah, just a close up. You know, I'm willing to work with work in a work group with the utility companies and then with the telecommunicators and see if we can't come up with a solution to address all concerns. So far as the penalties and whatnot that are assessed, normally that's not uncommon to foster compliance. The federal government does it, the state government does it, and that's the way we get attention. But here again, I am willing to work with Sean and then Ms. Krieger and the other stakeholders to make sure that we come up with a solution to address these concerns.
Great.
All right.
Thank
you, Madam Chair.
That concludes the hearing on House Bill 1231. Thank you all for being here, and we'll now move to House Bill 1251. Delegate Washington.
Can you hear me? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, we can.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, Delegate Alonzo Washington here to present on House Bill 1251. If you all would just bear with me for a second and just imagine with me, and this might be true for some of you on this committee, but imagine you have a student at the University of Maryland. Maybe because it's AKA Day, Alpha Day.
Very much so, sir. Give me, hold on a second.
There we go. All right. Thank you, Delegate Brooks. Just imagine that your student goes to the University of Maryland because it's AKA Day. Today maybe they joined a fraternity or sorority. And then they graduated. They move into an apartment near College Park, and they have a car. They're paying a premium there of about $800 a year every 6 months. Then they purchase a home nearby, just 2 miles away in zip code 20785. And they purchase a home there, but once they realize they are moving there, their insurance skyrockets about $700 because they live in a more low income neighborhood with Black people that live there, or minority, or in a more minority district. And so that right there is the reality that so many Marylanders are facing right now, where they move to a certain zip code nearby their home, or even to another area, their zip code goes up simply because that community in that zip code, their car insurance will increase because of the community and because of the race of that community and because of the zip code that they live in. To address this issue, I have a bill in front of you that I've proposed about 2 years now, but this way is a little bit differently. The first time I proposed this bill, it was simply removing territory from the ability from the car insurance companies to be able to develop or equate their rates. But in this bill, I provided you two different options to this committee, both of which would be a drastic improvement to the current situation facing our residents. The first option is to limit the use of zip codes as a rating factor so that there is no more than 25% variance in automobile insurance rates attributed to the use of zip codes. The second option is to require that an insurer uses no more than 5 territories for the entire state of Maryland. So there'll be only 5 territories under this second amendment that I have in front of you when establishing automobile insurance rates. So they can still, under both amendments that I proposed to you, they can still use territories, but it's on a wider basis. Or in the first instance, it requires that there be no more than 25% variance in the rate itself. Under both amendments, we are striking the language in the bill requiring the MIA commissioner to issue rebates on insurance payments during the state of emergency. As all of you know, we all didn't go anywhere because we were in a state of emergency, and our premiums, we continue to pay similar or same car insurance rates while we were at home during this pandemic.
Excuse me.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Insurance companies in Maryland are not allowed to use race or income to set insurance rates, but they can use a variety of non-driving factors that act as proxies, including to set premiums. Maryland law allows auto insurance companies to use these non-driving related factors in, quote, in predicting the likelihood that you will be in an auto accident in the future or will file a claim for damages, unquote. The data finds that this is almost always tied directly to race. In the past, as I said earlier, this bill is amended, gives you two options. The two options presented to the committee are reasonable, common sense policies that can lighten the financial burden on residents while still creating minimal disruption in the current business practices in the insurance industry. This body requires Maryland drivers this bill requires Maryland drivers to purchase auto insurance, and it is our duty to ensure it is affordable and equitable. So we're requiring that everybody must have insurance in the state of car insurance in the state of Maryland. It is also our duty to make sure that it is affordable to people and is equitable. Our new president, Joe Biden, touched on this issue in a recent town hall. He said, quote, if you live in a Black neighborhood, you're going to pay a higher premium on your car. This is simply the reality for Marylanders and people across the country. It is past time that the General Assembly takes meaningful action to address the inequitable auto insurance rates that continue to burden Black and Brown residents. This bill is just the first step in achieving this objective. I ask for a favorable report for House Bill 1251. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Questions for Delegate Washington? I have one. I'm looking at your written testimony. Maybe it's buried in it. How are you amending the bill?
Yes, so we do have two amendments. So the first amendment, just go back to it real quick. So the first amendment, we have two amendments. The first amendment option is to limit the use of zip codes as a rating factor so that there is no more than 25% of a 25% variance in automobile insurance rates attributed to the use of zip codes. And the second option is to require that an insurer uses no more than 5 territories for the entire state of Maryland when establishing automobile insurance rates. So automobile insurance companies are using zip codes to establish rates. We're asking in the second amendment that they can use 5 territories in the entire state instead of every zip code, which based on the data that we have, Madam Chair, seems to be making Black communities and Black zip codes premium higher from an average increase between $200 all the way up to $700 more than a white or more affluent neighborhood.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Delegate Pipke. Well, he seems frozen, I think. All right, maybe we'll take the next person and we can go back to Delegate Pipke. Marceline White.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair and members of the committee. For the record, Marceline White with the Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition, MCRC, and MCRC advances economic rights and financial inclusion through research, education, advocacy, and direct service. We're here today in strong support of House Bill 1251, and I want to thank Delegate Washington for bringing this bill forward. I'm happy to discuss the transparency issues, and I think my colleagues are as well, but I wanted to focus my comments on the use of zip codes today. Obviously, this body has been looking at racial equity issues through this session in particular and highlighting issues of disparate treatment. And whether intended or not, the use of zip codes results in Black and Brown Maryland drivers paying higher prices for auto insurance. So today we're asking you to take action to address these disparities. MCRC and the Consumer Federation of America have a forthcoming study that shows that the more diverse a neighborhood is, the higher the rates of auto insurance are. Increasingly, as the neighborhood becomes more diverse, the cost of auto insurance goes up. Conversely, the more white a neighborhood is, the less that community pays in insurance. We require people to have auto insurance, and obviously many families need it to get to work and to get to family sustaining wages. Right now, with COVID-19, many of the essential workers that we are supporting, that are doing these basic jobs that are so critical, live in these neighborhoods where they're being charged more for auto insurance. This legislation gives you two options to address these issues. And I will say that this is a policy decision, just like the ACA addressed differences by sex in health insurance, and the Civil Rights Act addressed differences in race-based life insurance pricing. The General Assembly can address this use of zip code that has unintended disparate impact. It doesn't conflict with federal regulations, and it provides options, so it does not prohibit the use of zip codes. So for these reasons, we ask for a favorable report of HB 1215 to address the unintended consequences and make insurance more fair and affordable.
Thank you. Delegate Pippi. I can see you're moving now, so.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I'm sorry, the internet sucks in the General Assembly and I was kicked out. I wanted to ask Delegate Washington a question, but
sorry, he's still here.
Nonetheless, I'll ask Mrs. White a question.
You can ask Delegate Washington a question.
Okay. Okay, sure. So I'm sure we'll hear from some of the opponents. My only question is, if you're an insurance company, you're just getting the zip code. You know, you're getting accidents and you're getting claims. It's not, and I don't know, maybe it is showing the race, but it's showing the zip code. You know, and if you're having to make decisions based on what rates you charge, and you find that in this particular zip code, there's a tremendous amount of claims filed, you know, I'd be curious to see how that works. You know, it's similar to if you live next to a river and you have to get flood insurance. I mean, it's based on the zip code next to the river, and that's not apples to apples here, but I would like to learn more about that piece. I mean, obviously, if there's, you know, disparate impacts on race, you know, we should look at that for sure, and that's important. But, you know, a business, I'm sure, is just looking at the zip code of where these claims are coming out of, and that's probably how they adjust what their rates are. So I don't know if Delegate Washington could maybe just address that portion for calculating rates and renewals and such.
Thank you, Delegate Pipke, for that question. And you're right, man. The internet in the General Assembly does suck. And you know, what I wanted to answer your question directly, though, we do have this bill. We provided you with 2 amendments. I'm not sure if you saw the amendments, Delegate Pippi, but we didn't remove zip codes from them being able to use and determine their rates. What we said that we provided this committee with what we heard last year or the year before when I had this bill, that, and from the opposition, that they need to use territory some way, somehow. So what we did in one of the amendments was we downgraded the bill, how much they can determine the factoring determination for that zip code of only being about 25% of the determining of the equation of that rate for the car insurance. Then also what we did was to make it equal. We said that, you know, look, well, let's not have 1,000 zip codes in the state of Maryland. Let's not use that. Let's use territories. Let's use 5 territories in the state so that you can treat different places equally. Whereas I don't have to go a mile move a mile down the street into another zip code, and my car insurance increases by $300-400. You know, so expand the coverage. That will get rid of the disparities that are occurring right now. So we did keep zip codes, the ability to use zip codes in there, but we also allowed another option to use geographic areas, 5 geographic areas too.
And, and I'll take a look at the amendments and thank you for that.
Yep.
Thank you. Delegate Arndt.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Delegate Washington, both you and Ms. White made a comment about in Black and brown neighborhoods. Are you alluding that we're charging a higher rate for Black or brown in these neighborhoods?
What we're saying is that the rates in those zip codes where there's a higher number, the population in those zip codes are majority Black or brown or Latinx or minority. Rate is much higher than it is in a more affluent area zip code or a white area. So
Okay, if I lived there, would my rates be higher?
your
Yes.
rates, yes. If you
Okay.
move there,
Okay.
your rates, yeah, that was my example. That was my example initially, that, you know, anybody can move into that zip code is because that zip code has a higher number population of African Americans or Latinx.
Okay, thank you very much. I
And
appreciate
Delegate
it.
Aaron's, there's testimony I attached from next
I'm
door.
done. Thank you very much. I'm
Okay.
done. Thank you.
All right. Christopher Drews.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Christopher Dews, and I'm a policy advocate for the Job Opportunities Task Force, where our mission is to help lower wage workers advance to higher wage jobs. We support House Bill 1251 as a means of decriminalizing poverty and ensuring that auto insurance is affordable for lower income workers and job seekers. Specifically, I want to look at this from an employment perspective. Mobility is key in Maryland's regional economy. The Census Bureau reported that 50% of Marylanders travel outside of their county for employment, and that only 45% of Marylanders as of right now can telework. The statistic is more pronounced for lower income communities of color, where there's a scarcity of jobs available by public transit. The Baltimore Sun recently reported that only 9% of jobs in the Baltimore region can be reached within 1 hour, one way by public transit. So as it says, access to a vehicle and affordable auto insurance is necessary. What hasn't been said yet is that Maryland Auto reported last year that 500,000 Marylanders, 12.8% of the state, drive uninsured, most citing the cost of auto insurance as the reason for this infraction. This is because of, as was already mentioned, things like zip code being used in the underwriting process. Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition, who's also on this call, did a study examining the disparate impact of zip codes and what they can do to insurance premiums. They found that a single 30-year-old man like myself in Baltimore City pays on average more than $500 more than he would have to pay for the same insurance in Montgomery County. Just so you guys can get like an overall view of how that would look. They go on to show that many drivers pay $150 to $700 more for car insurance in one neighborhood than they would have to pay in an adjacent neighborhood. As you also know, Transportation Code 17-107 states that driving without auto insurance in Maryland is a crime punishable by up to 1 year in jail, a $1,000 fine, or both. So that means these drivers who are risking going to work are risking being criminalized simply because they want to take care of their families. This is the criminalization of poverty. We talk about it in our criminalization of poverty report, and this specifically affects our pre-apprenticeship construction training program participants who are paying 12 to 25% of their annual income in auto insurance alone. And it's a real problem. So I thank Delegate Washington for putting this bill forward, and we hope that you guys will move favorable on this bill. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I'm going to finish with the proponents. Reverend Kobe Little. Kobe Little. I don't think I see him on the list. Douglas Heller.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the committee. I am Doug Heller on behalf of Consumer Federation of America in support. The Consumer Federation has looked at a series of data that we purchased from industry sources that has premiums from 10 of the largest carriers in Maryland in every single zip code of the state, and we've analyzed a good driver's premium. Now, this bill addresses the fact that the use of small territorial units of zip code leaves some drivers paying much more than other similar motorists, even neighbors right across the street, as Delegate Washington was alluding to. Depending, for example, upon which side of the street of which side of Cross Country Boulevard you live in Baltimore, your premium could jump by more than 80%. The cost of a minimum limits policy from one of the state's largest insurers costs $2,027 a year for a driver living on the 21209 side of the boundary. But if you live on the 21215 side, the company charges the exact same driver with a perfectly clean driving record, $3,689 for the exact same coverage. What must be acknowledged, because this is not a unique example in our data, is that the residents of lower priced zip codes and the of lower priced zip codes in Maryland are by a very large majority predominantly white. The residents of higher priced zip codes are by a very large majority Black. This is the underlying story of the current system of territorial pricing in Maryland. Data show clearly that as the percentage of white residents in a zip code declines, the premium increases. Now, the Maryland zip codes with the highest percentages of people of color pay the highest premiums. Now, insurance companies will doubtless argue that this sort of racialization of auto insurance pricing is not their intent, and no companies ever ask about somebody's race. It is the outcome of the pricing policies that are currently allowed in Maryland, and it needs to be addressed. Now, I will say very briefly that of the two approaches, one of them, which creates 5 regions rather than zip codes, it would allow, as one of the delegates asked in a question, the ability to just have larger groups, still pricing based on whatever data the insurance companies see, but it would allow spreading the risk wider by having fewer smaller slices and dices of consumers in Maryland. The other option, by placing a 25% limit on the expanse of premium, the variation, would ensure a much more evenly priced system throughout the state. Either one of those, or as CFA would recommend, putting both of those together, would reduce disparities, allow insurance companies to cover their needs, but still ensure that more Marylanders can access the insurance market. And that is a critical goal that this legislature, we hope, will take up, and we urge passage of the bill.
Thank you. Delegate Pippi, sorry, is your hand up for these witnesses? Okay, that's okay. Delegate Howard.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Is density part of the equation as far as figuring out rates?
If I may.
Yes, Mr. Heller, that's good.
Yeah, so absolutely, population density affects premiums. So there are two ways the premiums are affected.
That's fine. We'll just fake this. Let's just say we cut Baltimore 70-30, right? So it's based on population density based on zip code, not neighborhood. So it's conceivable that, yes, on one side of the street, the rate is lower, but that's because the density on 30% of that zip code is in Baltimore, whereas the density on 70% of Baltimore is in the adjoining zip code.
Well, that would only make sense if people only drove in their zip code. I mean, that's part of the problem. Is
that makes sense for insurance rates for the entire state, and people drive out of state. But so it's based on density. We know it's cut across some neighborhoods. So is it conceivable that, and again, I'm just making up a scenario, but you take an amazing city like Baltimore, and it is a beautiful city. And on one side, on the left-hand side, you have 70% of the zip code includes Baltimore City. On the right-hand side, you have 30% of this zip code includes Baltimore City. And because there's less density on the right than there is the left, on the left-hand side, there's the higher rates.
Well, it's not conceivable that it would be actuarially appropriate. There wouldn't be sufficient credible data to show that a rate should jump by 80% when you cross a zip code boundary. That's the problem. Zip codes slice and dice groups too small. And the reality of transportation is that people don't just drive in their zip code, even if they live in the Baltimore County or the Baltimore City side. And that's why expanding, limiting the kind of these small regions would be very effective in terms of spreading the risk fairly and equitably, but not so small that people would cross the street and pay hundreds, even thousands of dollars more for coverage.
Well, I don't want to diminish it or oversimplify it or come across as an extreme layman, but it just seems to me if there's more people in an area, you tend to have more just small fender benders and accidents and things that get reported. I mean, and again, I don't want to oversimplify it, but if I'm walking through a crowded mall versus an uncrowded mall, I'm probably going to have to say, excuse me, walk around people 25 times more than I would an uncrowded situation, and certainly would run the risk of bumping into someone or I don't know. So
and Delegate Howard,
I look forward to the insurance companies being able to put a little bit of perspective. I got your perspective. I understand what you're saying.
But if I could just the last point on the malls, in these less dense areas, you have much more severe accidents. So the accidents happen at higher speeds and have much more severity. It's not that it balances out. That's why we think that there should be regional differences. But with less frequency.
Exactly,
that's right. So you measure both frequency and severity. And the point is that you can do that, and you can allow insurance companies to do that. Delegate Washington hasn't eliminated the use of territory, but he said we've got to come up with a way that balances that insurance industry need and the public policy of ending this practice that, not intentionally perhaps, but the outcome is a very clear disparate impact. And it's on the legislature, since the legislature requires people to buy this product, to make sure that you do that balancing right, because the insurance companies have not done that. And you don't have to blame them for it, but they haven't done it because they haven't been required to.
I look forward to their response. Thank you very much, Madam Vice Chair.
Sure. Delegate Rogers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Heller, I'm looking at the bill. There are certain things that are covered and different types of insurance that are covered, certain aren't. Is there a transparency component to this bill?
You know, Delegate Rogers, thank you for mentioning that. There is. One of the things that is unique about Maryland law is that consumers aren't allowed to know the way in which insurance companies will price policies based on things that have nothing to do with their driving. So right now, insurance companies can keep private the explanations of how much they're going to charge somebody based on their job title. You know, so whether or not they charge a white collar professional a lower rate than a blue collar professional, which some companies in Maryland appear to do. We can't find that out because that is now covered as a trade secret. Even though I can go and get that data for these companies in Virginia and in many other states, Maryland has given the companies the ability to keep that secret. It doesn't make any sense. We as consumers should have a right to know and really investigate. And you as a body, legislative body, should be able to investigate and assess how companies slice and dice and price customers on things like their job title, their level of education, or their credit history. And this bill would also end that transparency, which would further help explore and address the potential for disparate impacts.
So in other words, you couldn't just arbitrarily charge delegates more.
You know, we don't even know what the companies are doing because they keep it private, and there's no reason for that. Like I said, in other states, these same companies have to reveal everything, and whoever they happen to charge more, we'd be able to see it. And then you as a legislative body could publicly, you know, could investigate it and address it if you thought there was a problem.
Delegate Rogers, they might be. We just don't know, man. We just don't know.
Well, you know, and that's why, Delegate Washington, that's why I asked, because, you know, I'm looking at my insurance rates, and once I put those delegate tags on there, it seemed like it went up.
Delegate Queen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question from Mr. Heller. What does CFA stand for?
Oh, I'm sorry. Consumer Federation of America. We're a national nonprofit organization comprised of consumer and public interest organizations all around the country, about 250 organizations.
Okay, thank you very much. I was looking online, and as you all were talking, I saw some articles about the zip code being a proxy for race and making insurances higher. Harvard Review, some other organization. I think it was something from CFA who had a report on that as well. Yeah. Can you tell me are there other states have any legislation like this, or is this just something we're talking about here in Maryland?
Well, no, other states have taken approaches to reform it. In California, for example, the amount that the impact that zip code can have is limited. California has a very different regulatory system than Maryland does, so it's not apples to apples, but there are limitations placed on the use of zip code there. And we see much less disparity in California than you see in Maryland. In fact, when we analyzed every zip code, and we analyzed zip codes around the country, Baltimore was #1 in terms of the disparity between zip codes that are predominantly Black and those that are predominantly white in terms of the premium. So the particular disparate impact harming people of color in auto insurance pricing is the worst in Baltimore of the entire country. So you have a uniquely severe problem with this, but there are other approaches that have been used to help reduce the impact of territory. I think the proposal of Delegate Washington here are very strong options for your committee to consider.
All right, thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, I see that you are back. Did you want to take over? We would be ready to start with the opposition testimony.
Madam Chair, can I just say this last piece, that we do have just 2 amendments for you all to consider, and they are attached to your emails, and that's sent out.
Okay, thank you. All right.
All right.
Well, thank you so very much, Madam Vice Chair. And are we at Sandra Dotson?
Correct.
Right.
Good afternoon, Chairman Davis and committee members. Sandra Dotson with Maryland Automobile Insurance Fund in opposition to House Bill 1251. As House Bill 1251 was introduced, it impacts our Maryland Auto in two ways. First, we would lose the ability to use territory as one of the few underwriting factors that we use, and the potential of a mandatory premium rate reduction on our surplus. We've submitted detailed written testimony. I would just tell you the loss of territory would have an impact on our policyholders, with some receiving a significant decrease while others receiving a significant increase. By statute, we are, and any insurer is required to review their territories every 3 years and certify that they are actuarially justified with the Maryland Insurance Administration. If a mandatory rate reduction were to occur during a state emergency, would have a significant impact on our surplus. For example, if there was a 10% rate reduction for 6 months in 2020, we would have seen a loss in premium of $3.5 million, and that would have been a direct reduction in our surplus in the same amount. And as you know, we're always working to keep our surplus above the assessment threshold to avoid an assessment. For these reasons, Maryland Auto urges an unfavorable report.
Thank you. Marta Hardy.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair Dumais, Economic Matters Committee. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today to testify on this bill for State Farm. We oppose the bill. I'm going to focus on one piece of the bill, and I think the witnesses, you already heard from Ms. Dodson, who we agree with, and you're going to hear from some others on the other components. I'm going to focus on the part of the bill that would repeal the trade secret protection that Maryland law currently provides to the proprietary rating models that insurers use. These rating models are the complex mathematical and statistical formulas and algorithms that companies use to match price to risk. While there are factors that most and maybe all companies use in some way, what these formulas do is tell how those factors are used, how they relate to each other, their weight and their effect. It is the recipe, if you will, not the ingredients. And I want to be clear, Maryland law does not protect the factors themselves from public disclosure. What Maryland law protects is the rating model that governs how those factors are used. Maryland is in line with the overwhelming majority of other states. I disagree with the proponents on this in protecting these models because they are competitive. We don't want competitors to be looking at each other's pricing information because that inhibits competition, and ultimately that's going to injure consumers. I want to make clear what Maryland law already does and does not do. The protection under this law is not from the MIA. The MIA has complete authority to review an insurer's rating models. And in fact, that's why we need the protection, because once they are in the hands of the MIA, they could otherwise be public information and therefore accessible by our competitors. And the other thing, as I've already said, but I think it bears repeating, the protection does not extend to the factors themselves. Those remain public. What factors we use are public. What is not public are the way in which these expensive, these formulas that companies spend millions of dollars to develop and are key to how they compete in the marketplace, how those factors are blended together to produce the actual rate. And finally, as the committee knows, and I believe knows, the Maryland Public Information Act has long protected companies' trade secrets from disclosure under the Public Information Act. So this isn't anything unique to the insurance article, and to this context, it is in fact well settled in Maryland law. For those reasons, we would request an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Nancy Egan.
Good afternoon, Chair and other committee members. My name is Nancy Egan, and I represent the American Property Casualty Insurance Association. We have 1,200 insurance company members, and we write 60% of the insurance market in the United States. I'm not going to go into detail about the use of territory, because I think if you look into my pretty lengthy testimony, you will see that I have charts about the impact of the change in territories and how it would impact in your different regions and what could happen. I would like to stress that one of the delegates asked a question. I do live in Baltimore City, and I am aware that there are more thefts of vehicles in Baltimore City. There are more likely of vandalism. I know that every day when I go on Nextdoor, I hear about someone in my neighborhood whose car was parked on the street and someone broke in. So there are reasons when you have more people living close by and there's more on-street parking, that is part of the claim data that goes into looking at by the carriers. But I would like to say that Delegate Turner last year had put in a bill. It was for low-cost auto program in Prince George's County in Baltimore City. And part of that was to look at ways to make auto insurance more affordable. And I think that's the basic issue here, is making it more affordable. And with that, there has been discussions of perhaps a low-cost auto program with lower limits that could be available to certain people. And also at the NAIC level, they have, I should say, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, the NAIC, they've convened a special committee to look at race and diversity throughout the insurance industry. And one of those work groups is work group number 3. Number 3 is looking specifically about the rates on auto and homeowners, how to make them more affordable, and also looking at the rating factors. So with that, I urge an unfavorable report. I appreciate Delegate Washington for removing the mandatory rate reduction. In addition, I would like to talk about the fact that during this period of time, we refunded over $440 million in rate refunds because people are driving their cars less. And the insurance commissioner has asked us to once again review all of our rates, to reach out to our consumers to make sure that with the less driving, that's been reflected in our rates. We've been working with policyholders to offer them insurance plans to work with in case they're unable to pay their premium due to the effects of losing their job. So overall, thank you very much. Sorry, and I'll defer to the committee. Thank you.
Does everybody see this little blue box in the left-hand corner? Can all of our witnesses see that?
Yes, it does show up. I apologize, Chairman Davis.
Oh, no, it's by no means is it just you, but I think I need to remind everybody when it hit double zeros, that's not a recommendation. We need to stop at that point so we can get the other witnesses.
Guilty as charged. My apologies.
No problem. Robert Enton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Robert Enton on behalf of the American Property Casualty Insurers Association. Now, I think the prior witnesses have very much discussed the issue. I was going to speak about the granting the insurance commissioner the power to mandate premium reductions, and I appreciate Delegate Washington having addressed that issue for me through an amendment. I would only say that I think the industry has no desire to discriminate against anyone. They historically look at what the experience is, and the zip code is a boundary. And I understand the argument about living across the street, you can be in a different zip code, and what's the difference? And I think at the NAIC and other places, and we're certainly happy to sit down and talk about, is there some way to get to the same kind of use of information and as to what happens. The bottom line is we look at the claims experience, and we don't look at it by race. We don't look at it in that fashion at all. But we do know that within certain areas, they have a higher claim experience than anyone else. Once again, our ratings can't be arbitrary. They can't be capricious. They have to be actuarially sound. I'm not aware that there have been complaints at the MIA about the use of zip codes, but we're certainly happy to sit down and talk with everyone about how we do this and whether or not there's some appropriate mechanism to address the concerns that have been raised. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bryson Popham.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Bryson Popham here before you today on behalf of 4 clients, the insurance agents and brokers, the Maryland Association of Mutual Insurance Companies, Agency Insurance Company, and Progressive Insurance. That really spans a wide swath of the automobile insurance industry. I appreciate the sponsors' withdrawal of the language on page 2 about the commissioner's authority. I was going to address that. I will not now in light of the proposed amendments. And I'm going to focus exclusively on the removal of territorial rating, beginning with one thing we can all agree on. Automobile insurance is expensive in Maryland. It was expensive in the early 1980s when I began my career down here in Annapolis, and we have had bills every year to remove territorial rating. And I would say the same thing today that I said then. As long as those rates are determined by your insurance commissioner not to be inadequate, excessive, or unfairly discriminatory, they should be permitted. Now, that does not mean I do not acknowledge the comments that have been made about the racial impact of territorial rating. That's a legitimate issue. But I would respectfully submit that removing rating factors like territorial rating, just like we talked about last week, removing credit scoring, removing any rating factors, will only produce one thing: less competition. And competition is the only thing, it is the only tool we have today to keep the price of automobile insurance under control. So with that, Mr. Chairman, on behalf of my clients, I'd respectfully request an unfavorable report.
Thank you very much. Tina Quigley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Tina Quigley here today on behalf of Allstate Insurance in opposition to House Bill 1251. I have not seen the amendments that the sponsor has proposed, so my comments will reflect the bill as introduced, but I'm also going to focus my comments just on one aspect of the bill, and that's the trade secret provisions. I also was going to cover the mandatory rate reductions that were to be ordered by the commissioner, but as the others have stated before me, as the sponsor has removed that provision from the bill, I will not talk about that. So with respect to the trade secret provisions, House Bill 1251 would repeal those trade secret protections of the rating models that we currently have under the law. So to be clear, the rating factors that companies use are public information. It's our rating models that are proprietary. But the experts who are charged with reviewing every filing and ensuring that we are in compliance with Maryland law, that's the Maryland Insurance Administration, receives all of the information, the rating factors and the rating models. There's no other type of business in Maryland that's required to make its proprietary business models open for inspection, not just by the public or by its competitors. And so that should not be the case for insurance companies. A lot of time and money has gone into developing these models to help match price to risk, providing competition in the market. So current law is important from a competitive perspective. We will not be in a position to bring innovative products to the state if you make our models open to the public. And at the end of the day, that won't benefit the marketplace or your constituents. So for these reasons, I would urge the committee to give the bill an unfavorable report.
Thank you. Andrew Kirkner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Andrew Kirkner on behalf of the National Association of Mutual Insurance Companies and our more than 1,400 member companies across the country. I'm going to focus my comments on territory as a rating factor. I do want to clear up some of the proponent testimony that the committee heard. Simply put, territory is one rating factor used by insurers that is absolutely supported by actuarial science. You heard by one of the proponents earlier that there was no actuarial basis for the use of zip codes as territory. Candidly, that's inaccurate. The Maryland Insurance Administration is tasked with ensuring that rating factors are both actuarially sound and unfairly discriminatory. The Maryland Insurance Administration has clearly decided that the use of territory and the way that companies use it is actuarially sound. And as this committee has discussed in the past, it is up to you to decide if something is unfairly discriminatory. So I'd like to talk to you about why territory as a rating factor is in fact not unfairly discriminatory. Territory helps insurers figure out what risk an insured poses. So to address some of the earlier questions by the committee, what are some of those things? Well, a person's territory can tell us questions of density. It can tell us about accident frequency and severity. It can tell us about auto theft and crime. It can tell us about miles driven. And then also, Mr. Chairman, it can tell us about the road conditions in a given jurisdiction. All of these things are helpful in determining what risk an insured poses to an insurer. Finally, speaking to the amendments within the last 15 seconds, the idea that companies should be limited to 25% in terms of the territory usage strikes counter to the notions of competition in the marketplace. And then finally, the idea that we should be reduced to 5 territories would in fact create the same problem and make the risk less accurate to rate. So for these reasons, we urge an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Delegate Charkoudian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question is for Nancy Egan. Can you hear me okay? My internet's being funny today. Oh. Nancy, are you? Okay. So I'm looking. I was trying to look at your testimony here, and I guess I'm trying to. I've said this a bunch of times, so I don't want to be repetitive, but this is the conversation that we have in this committee, which is when you say claims experience, when you say that you are able to, you're essentially saying you want to be able to charge more for people who are more likely to file a claim. And you have the various factors that determine whether people are more likely to file a claim, but that is essentially what it is that you're saying. Is that right? I can't tell, Nancy. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I apologize. I was on mute.
Okay.
Well, we're basing it on the personal auto accident years. So we were looking at data from 2016 and 2018. This is the loss cost. So these are the actual losses that I'm showing on the charts. What the losses were in Baltimore City versus a different county, et cetera. So that could be, the frequency and also the severity of loss is reflected in those charts.
So, but I just want to make sure we're clear. You're saying it is a loss. It's the likelihood that someone files a claim and gets money from you, correct?
No, this is the actual losses. This is the actual data you're looking at in those charts. That's 2016, 2018 data.
I'm saying that's not data though on accident rates. That's data on how much you had to pay out, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So would you agree that you're more likely to have to pay out if somebody does not have enough money to pay for smaller fender benders, those kinds of things themselves?
I can't answer that. I'm sorry. I don't. I'm looking at basic loss costs about what's happened and what we've showing in data for what the losses were. It doesn't it doesn't reflect whether someone's income and their ability to pay for a claim. That's not reflected. These are pure losses.
Sure. And I think that we can all assume that's part of what would be behind a loss is that if someone needs to use their insurance more because they can't afford the minor repairs, then you would have greater loss from an insurance company. I would say the insurance system is working, but you would have greater loss in that particular, with that particular person. So let me ask this, are you allowed to use income?
No, we're not. We don't use income at all. Right. We don't know that at all.
Okay.
So like I said.
Has it ever been legal to use income? I actually am asking, I don't know. Has there been?
No, it is. It's not legal to use income. And as we testified last week, we can't use income when we're doing credit scoring as well. So
right.
those
So
two
instead,
factors are not included. So, but I put to you though, you do understand that the more losses occur, the more likely we're, that we're looking to see what we should charge in the future based on our results from the prior years.
yeah, no, I understand how insurance works. And I also understand this is something that we require Marylanders to have. And so that's this particular, that's why auto insurance in particular is, in my mind, there's a great responsibility to the General Assembly to make sure that we're doing it in a way that's not discriminatory, explicitly or implicitly. And I think if you look at the history of the racial gap in the United States, you'll see that there are both explicit and implicit ways that our laws across the country have contributed to that racial gap. And so it is our responsibility to look at, when do we have a law that potentially on paper you could show it to us as though it's not a racial discrimination, but in fact the implication is a massive racial discrimination and it reinforces a racial wealth gap. Then it's our responsibility to challenge that and question that and break it apart. So I have one other question for you, which is that on this, you have this chart that sort of shows, if we change our rating, then these folks, this many people would pay more, this many people would pay less.
Yes.
And I suspect that if there had been a time in the past where we allowed for income-based discrimination or income-based tools, that you would have looked similar. If we were to say, I mean, obviously, anytime you change what it is that you all can consider, you're going to have some people paying more and some people paying less, just by definition of the way that insurance works, right? And so when we're taking away something that potentially affects a wealth gap, when we're shifting who it is that has to pay what for insurance, inevitably there is going to be a shift in the pricing. And some people are going to pay more and some people are going to pay less. What that tells us is that poor people are paying more, or people of color are paying more, or people in the Baltimore City or the zip codes are paying more right now. And your data shows us that when we change that, there will be a shift. I mean, that's kind of, it is by definition what we're trying to do, is to not have a gap in people of color paying more proportionally than white people.
A question?
Yeah, I didn't, was that a question for me?
I'm sorry. I'm asking about that chart that you have.
I know, but you didn't ask me a question, but I will say this. I was an insurance agent in Baltimore City from the time I was 24 years of age. And when I worked in Baltimore City until we sold our agency in 2007, rates for Baltimore City were always higher than our surrounding territory. The rates that we charged, I live in Baltimore City. I understand the problems that I pay more than people across the county line. I also pay higher property taxes than people across the line as well. So I don't believe that what you're saying is that you want people to subsidize in areas where there's less claims for areas where there's more claims. And that's a decision that I'm not here to make, but I am providing you with the data of the actual loss cost across the state so that you can see it and understand how we see it. That, and if you're in a rural territory, you're not having as many cars. There's not as much traffic. Most accidents occur 25 miles from your home. So therefore, the people that are in rural areas, yes, there's going to be less loss costs. So I know we've had this discussion before, but I don't know what else to reflect on for you. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry. So I guess by definition, insurance is about subsidizing each other to spread the risk. And so based on what you just said, if it's a rural urban issue, then it would seem that the 5 territories would take care of that. It's the zip codes that concern me because they're so much more closely tied to issues of race and issues of poverty. And that's where it feels like those things slip in. So I guess the final question, I don't want to debate the bill anymore right now because that's not what we're supposed to be doing. But the final question is, if the example that you just gave of sort of rural urban, what would the 5 territories that sort of allow for that kind of a range take care of that?
As I have to say to you, I represent 1,200 companies. I've not seen the amendments, and I'm not at liberty to speak for my members. They weren't shared in advance, so I'm sorry I can't reflect on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Howard.
So my question is for Marta Harding of State Farm, and it's on the mathematical equations that you use. Is that used throughout the United States?
Delegate Howard, it's my understanding, and I will confirm that in the states where the models can be kept to the regulator, i.e. not public, that we use our proprietary model in accordance with, each state might have unique laws that bear on what we can and can't do. But in general, we use that model wherever it's not made public. There are a handful of states where it's made public, where we use more generic public models where we don't care because everybody uses it. So it's less competitive.
Okay, if we could we check on that? Because one of the things we've talked about is diversity in this bill and disparate impact. And Michigan has a 75% white population and has the highest insurance rates in the nation. And I know State Farm does business there, and I'm about 95, 98% sure you use the same mathematical formulas you use in Maryland to rate car insurance in Michigan. So if you could get back to me with that information, that would be great. Thank you, Marta.
You're welcome.
Any additional questions? If not, thank you very much. That concludes our hearing on House Bill 1251. I'd now like to go to House Bill 1275. Delegate Lasante.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Vice Chair and members of the esteemed Economic Matters Committee. It's my pleasure to bring to you House Bill 1275, Maryland Auto Insurance Fund School Bus Contractors. This issue outlined in 1275 was brought to my attention via a local bill, House Bill 54, Harford County Liability Insurance Contractors. That bill was seeking immunity for school bus contractors beyond the contract coverage provided through the Maryland Association of Boards of Educations. Testimony that had been provided to the Harford County delegation, as well as the Ways and Means Committee, revealed that the underwriter for MABE recommended a reduction in coverage from $2 million to $1 million. The coveraged amount was reduced by the Board of Education to $1 million. Therefore, the Harford County bus contractors were seeking alternative supplemental insurance. Apparently, this issue had been ongoing in my county for 5 years, and local contractors had not been successful in obtaining additional coverage on the open market. Therefore, House Bill 1275 seeks a statewide remedy because other counties are having similar situations. This bill simply compels me to explore and provide supplemental coverage options that will be made available to private bus contractors who have contracts with boards of educations. I will note that in the fiscal note that with House Bill 1275, on page 6, much to my surprise, there are 3,506 contracted vehicles in the state of Maryland compared to 3,700 that are owned. So I thought that was very, very compelling. Also, I wanted to note to the committee that I have sent an amendment to the committee on this bill to just specify, to make it very clear that my bill is just about not to offer primary coverage, only to offer supplemental. I'm not trying to interfere in any way with the coverage that exists through MABE. So after consulting with MABE, I believe that this is a prudent approach and it is ultimately a public safety issue for our children. It is regrettable that this issue has lingered for so many years without resolve. I am confident that this committee is committed to the public safety of our children and the contractors who carry them to and from work. I pray, absolutely, that we resolve this issue quickly before an accident occurs and we find our liability coverage woefully inadequate. Therefore, I ask for a favorable report on House Bill 1275 as amended that I'm offering to you. Thank you very much. Oh, and I forgot to mention also that the Association for Justice has also sent a letter of support for this bill as amended, and I don't think it made your file in time. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions for the sponsor? Seeing none, thank you very much. Concludes our hearing on House Bill 1275. I'd now like to go to House Bill 613. Delegate Ivy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, for the record, Delegate Ivy here presenting House Bill 613. This piece of legislation is a local bill for Prince George's County, and as introduced, it prohibits the Public Service Commission from issuing a certificate of public convenience and necessity for construction of a coal or gas-fired generating station if any part of the generating station would be located in Prince George's County. Second, the bill prohibits a person from operating one of the stations within the county limits as well. This bill is going to be amended. We've been working on it in the county delegation to ensure that this is proactive, prospective legislation rather than retroactive, which would allow the current plants to continue operating for the time being, but it would draw the line and say that no new coal or gas power plants would be allowed in Prince George's County limits. The community of Brandywine alone has 5 of these facilities located within a 15-mile radius. Prince George's County specifically has 3 of these generating stations. And so as we've all been doing the work of moving away from fossil fuels, moving towards renewable energy, this is really just one iteration of that fight. Just one step in the right direction. It would not close any plants. And I actually, I have my own thoughts on that, but this is to draw a line to ensure that no new coal or gas power generating stations are allowed to be constructed or operated in Prince George's County limits. I'm here for any questions, but I do want to mention again that this piece of legislation has not been voted out of our county delegation. The amendment that I was speaking on is not you don't have it in front of you because we haven't even approved that amendment in our local delegation. But I'm asking for a favorable report on House Bill 613 upon you all receiving the letter from our county delegation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. James Lawson.
Hello, my name is James Lawson. I live in Accokeek, Maryland. I represent the Southern Maryland First Guys Coalition. I'm here to testify in favor of HB 0613. This information was taken from a document, the 2019 Prince George County Community Health Assessment published by the Prince George County government and the University of Maryland. People living in Accokeek, Fort Washington, Oxon Hill, and Brandywine have a higher rate of respiratory illnesses than people living in other parts of Prince George County. We can reasonably conclude that air quality is responsible for most respiratory diseases in the southern area of the county. The leading causes of air pollution in the county, 5 power plants in the southern part of the county and adjacent Charles County, Indian Head Highway, and the 100,000 cars that use the highway daily, 72,000 low-flying airplanes that fly over the area each year. The legislature can't do anything about Indian Head Highway or the low-flying aircrafts. The legislature can do something about prohibiting the construction of additional power plants in the county. In 2018, the Dominion Energy Incorporated wanted to build a gas power plant to power a compressor station for a gas pipeline in Charles County that would take gas to Cove Point. The people of Charles County defeated this project. After losing in Charles County, Dominion bought land in Prince George County and applied for a permit. COVID-19 and energy market collapse prevented the plant from being constructed. Prince George County should not be a place where every polluting, undesirable industry project is welcome. Prince George County has more than its share of power plants and the resulting adverse health effects. Prince George County is developing a climate action plan. This plan will reduce emission from burning fossil fuel. Thank you.
Henry Cole. Is Mr. Cole with us?
Yeah, he's
yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I am Dr. Henry Cole. I'm an environmental scientist, and I speak today in favor of HB 613 on behalf of Clean Air Prince George's. It's an organization dedicated to clean up the air in a county that already has its share of power plants, fossil fuel power plants that pollute the air. The southern part of Prince George's County has become an environmental sacrifice zone. 4 large fossil fuel power plants are already in operation. And fortunately, a Texas-based Panda Energy company recently withdrew its application for what would have been a 5th within 13 miles of the Brandywine, located just half a mile from the town's elementary school. Yet there is nothing to prevent another company, out-of-state company, for example, from coming in and proposing yet another fossil fuel power plants. I have submitted some written testimony with a lot more information in it, but I want to highlight the fact that Prince George's County is a predominantly African-American county. The Brandywine area is 70% African-American. And as James Lawson has said, it's subjected to an enormous amount of emissions which cause problems. This bill is needed because the Public Service Commission has never met a power plant that it didn't like. And its environmental reviews are flawed and always in favor of the proposer. So we need to do something to address the health effects and climate change problem that's now becoming a crisis across this country and in the state of Maryland as well. So I hope you'll report this out favorably. Thank you very much. I'll take questions if you have them.
Are there any questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much. Jeff Guido.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair and committee members, thank you. Jeff Guido with the Baltimore DC Building Trades Council. We oppose House Bill 613. Currently, there are no contingent plans that we're aware of to replace the amount of energy with renewable sources, either wind or solar, in Prince George's County. The Chalk Point Generating Station is 2,647 megawatts of electricity, and it is already slated to be shut down, units 1 and 2, which are coal-fired, in June of 2021. That is a company decision, General Energy Holdings. The other 2 units are oil and gas. And to give a perspective of it, the Great Bay Wind Project in Somerset County would generate 150 megawatts of energy. The other offshore wind projects, Marwin, and is 79,000 acres. We erect 32 wind turbines for 248 megawatts of energy. The Skipjack Wind Project, another 26,000 acres for 10 turbines and 120 megawatts. There is no one-to-one trade-off between renewable energy sources and what the coal and gas can produce. With these crucially needed energy sources, Prince George's County would be compelled to purchase its energy from out of state, namely West Virginia and Pennsylvania. Maryland currently purchases 50% of its energy from out of state, and they have to increase their production. They want to burn coal to do it, and the wind blows east. So we urge an unfavorable report by the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Clark.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Tom Clark. I represent some 10,000 Maryland residents that belong to the IBEW. The IBEW is all about clean energy. We just don't think that HB 613 is ready for it. Please don't mistake utilization electricity to generation. Utilization, electric cars and all that, it's great. Generation, you can generate electric for like your house with solar panels, but it's only on a small scale. You cannot store solar energy on a large scale. It might not happen in our lifetime. I hope it does, but it doesn't. We have no way to replace this. Maryland itself consumes 1.5 times the amount of electricity it uses. But like I said, for generation purposes, we can't. Imagine the little lights you put in your landscape that are solar lights. They work great. They're bright. They're cute. You just plug them in the ground. But they depend on the sun. The sun is only out so many hours a day. Local 26 is working on keeping that sun out 24 hours, but I think we're years away from that too. But I want to remind you that Chalk Point is used as an emergency electrical station for PJM, the grid. Emergency electricity has come into play recently in Texas. It wasn't just the coal, the emergency power failed. Well, if we lose this emergency power here, it's easy. There's a lot of finger pointing in Texas. It's easy to finger point here. It would be because of HB 613 or HB 66. All I ask is wait until the technology catches up before we close these plants down. I appreciate it. I would like to oppose this bill. Thank you.
Joey Chen.
Thank you, Chairman Davis, and good afternoon again, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair Dumais, and committee members. Joey Chen on behalf of the Maryland PSC. The core of the Commission's opposition to House Bill 613 does go solely to the bill's uncodified language in Section 2, but I understand that now an amendment is in the works, and this amendment may very well address our concerns for this bill. But if it does not, and the ban on existing generating stations in the county is in fact enacted, it will pose significant reliability, cost, and impact issues and concerns, as well as legal ramifications. And briefly, these three facilities comprise approximately 3.6 gigawatts of power, which is approximately 1/4 of the state's total generation capacity. And taking this much generation offline is bound to raise serious reliability concerns. And given what we saw happen in Texas, the concerns can lead to devastating consequences. So in the end, the retirement of these facilities does mean that their energy and their capacity output will need to be replaced with alternative sources, either within or outside of the county, to avoid reliability issues. Now, the other main concern, if the ban were to continue, goes to the issue of cost implications associated with premature retirement. And these facilities have been in operation for years. Where the cost to serve generation in our state should be at the lowest, removing this amount of power will increase energy prices, and there could be additional costs to ratepayers if additional transmission is needed. And we're talking about socialized costs at that point. As the bill is drafted, the Commission would request an unfavorable report, but if the bill is amended to be prospective only, the PSC would probably take no position on the remainder of the bill, given that it doesn't change our role in the siting and permitting of the generating stations in Maryland. And to just clarify one point, the Commission is the neutral decision maker and relies heavily on the state subject matter experts on issues like environment, air impacts, traffic, things like that. So that wouldn't change. For these reasons, the Commission would request the committee grant an unfavorable report if not amended, but if so, then we would probably take a neutral position. Thank you.
Lisa Smith.
Thank you, Chairman Davis, committee members. For the record, Lisa Smith, Director of Legislative Affairs for the Maryland Public Service Commission. As Mr. Chen just stated, we believe that the amendment as described by the sponsor is a good one because it will address operational and legal concerns that Joey just described by making this prospective versus retroactive. However, we would still express some level of concern and let the committee know that we suggest you take a hard look at potential implications of the prospective pieces. As the committee knows, the Public Service Commission has the authority to regulate, does not have the authority to regulate generation or transmission. We do have the authority to approve siting, and we are required to, the commission is required to follow the procedure as set out in 7207 of the Public Utility Article for the citing of certificates of public convenience and necessity. And the commission is required to use the input of state agencies coordinated by the Department of Natural Resources and the Power Plant Research Program. As was stated by another witness, Maryland does depend disproportionately on energy produced outside of Maryland. And we do also hear opposition to citing all types of generation for different reasons. And I know this committee hears that a lot as well. So we just think it's important to think long and hard about this type of legislation that would start to stop certain types of generation, whether it's renewable, non-renewable, county by county. We know the public relies on the PSC as the regulator to ensure safe, reliable, and affordable service, and we're happy to be here to work with the committee and work with the sponsor. Thank you very much.
Bruce Bariano.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the House Economic Matters Committee. For the record, my name is Bruce Bariano, and I'm here on behalf of Vicinity Energy in very strong opposition to this legislation. Vicinity Energy is a company whose predecessor companies, plus Vicinity Energy right now, for the past over 100 years has been operating in Baltimore, chilled water and steamed heat in the downtown area of Baltimore very effectively and very successfully. We also have major operations in Boston and in Philadelphia. We are very honored to have been selected as one of 5 finalists by the University of Maryland, College Park, in a massive P3 over $300 million, maybe $500 million procurement over the next 30 to 50 years to put in an entirely new next-gen energy system on the College Park campus, which will be an enormous plus for College Park, and they're meeting their carbon neutrality goals, as well as my clients' such goals as well by 2050. This procurement will go on for the next couple of years. It's been approved initially by the Board of Public Works and by the Board of Regents, and we are waiting for the RFP to come out. This bill will completely bring that to a halt and will not allow this development of a new generation system of heating and air conditioning to replace the currently outdated and outmoded system at the University of Maryland, College Park. Respectfully, I don't know if they're aware of that, but if they are, they're not going to be happy about it. I want you to know of the consequences of this bill were to be passed. It would be very detrimental to Prince George's County, let alone College Park, and its tremendous environmentally challenging and appropriate goals in the next 30 to 50 years. Thank you very much. Be happy to answer any questions. Would urge an unfavorable report.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes our hearing on House Bill 613. I'd now like to go to Delegate Adams, for House Bill 220.
Sorry about that, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Delegate Chris Adams, happy to present House Bill 220, Clean Energy Attribute Credits and Procurement. 3 questions I always try to answer when I'm bringing a bill. 1, why is the bill being introduced? 2, what does the bill do? And then 3, why is it important to pass now? So I'll answer the first question by saying this bill is being introduced as an alternative market-based solution to help Maryland meet or even exceed its clean energy goals faster and cheaper than other options. The proposal evolves our existing RPS program to meet more aggressive clean energy targets being discussed. It relies on the trade of clean energy attributes which are very similar to the renewable energy credits that are traded today to meet Maryland's RPS. So what does the bill do? It sets a new clean energy standard that would get us to 100% clean energy by 2042. It allows companies and customers to voluntarily purchase more clean energy if they so choose. It does create a central auction process that would buy clean energy credits 3 years before they would need to be delivered to allow time for new generation resources to be built. All carbon-free electricity generators would compete to sell their energy attributes at the lowest possible cost. New clean energy resources can lock in the price for 7 years, creating a stable revenue stream that will help them get financing to build their projects. And then lastly, why is it important to pass now? This proposal will help ensure that Maryland can meet its decarbonization goals as quickly and cheaply as possible. Rather than being a complete departure from our current approach to secure renewable energy, this proposal builds on our existing RPS program and positions Maryland to be a leader in its pursuit of clean energy future. By relying on the market to meet those goals, it ensures that Maryland consumers do not overpay for that clean energy. I would ask the committee to consider all options available to us to meet these goals, and this proposal, in my opinion, deserves consideration. I would urge the committee to give this bill a favorable report. Mr. Chairman, at your pleasure, I have 3 members of a panel. I know we're not doing panels this year, but Neil Fitch, Brett Leininger, and John Fiastro, if they'd be able to submit their testimony, and then we could take questions.
Will do. Brett Leininger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, Brett Leininger here on behalf of NRG. Thanks to Delegate Adams for introducing the legislation and covering it. The bill contemplates getting to 100% over time. Maryland seems to be stepping in that direction and well should. I think over time, we've recognized and continue to have discussion about the RPS and some of the policy challenges related to it. This is agnostic as far as what energy is on the RPS. What it does ultimately is creates a downward pressure on the purchase of clean energy through the auction, as Delegate Adams described. It also creates transparency and predictability with that 3-year forecast and up to a 7-year commitment. It's important from the standpoint of policymakers. Right now, when the legislature is looking at what to do with energy policy, oftentimes we're looking in the rearview mirror sometime back and the information can be lagging. This would help provide a structure where the legislature is looking very currently and seeing what's going on. Also, from the standpoint of financial backers to those investing in those creating new energy generation, to be able to know that a price is going to be able to be locked in for a 3-year period of time and up to a 7-year commitment, it will resolve a lot of those issues from a business standpoint. Finally, this idea is not a brand new idea. It's patterned after what is presently done in the PJM and the capacity market. So it's creates a very interesting approach and one that is very thoughtfully crafted, and I'm happy to answer any questions, and we urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Neil Fitch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Delegate Adams and the members of the committee for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Neil Fitch. I am Senior Director of Regulatory Affairs for NRG Energy. We serve approximately 7 million customers across North America, including in Maryland. In my role, I provide regulatory and market design support for our various business interests across the East, including in PJM. I'm here today to support HB 220, which represents an appropriate modernization to the state's existing model for procuring and retiring renewable energy credits, or RECs, to achieve and exceed Maryland's clean energy goals. A forward market, as envisioned in the bill, allows all market participants, renewable energy resources, sellers of electricity, customers, and policymakers an opportunity to see the success of the clean energy market 3 years in advance. This, as Brett mentioned, this market design mirrors the most successful portions of PJM's existing capacity market and captures those benefits on behalf of carbon-free electricity resources. Importantly, this framework is durable regardless of the administration in Washington, the makeup of FERC, or the makeup of Congress. And we, like you, recognize that in the last 2 years since the MOPR decision, we've seen that Maryland's support for clean energy could be vulnerable in the long term without creative solutions. So with our robust clean energy targets, we need to re-envision the markets for RECs and the respective portfolio, a market that is, if I may coin the phrase, MOPR-proof. By installing this market mechanism and convening a forward-looking competitive market, Maryland can put itself in a stronger position to avoid future clean energy resources from being subjected to the MOPR. Now, I want to mention quickly that Maryland would not be alone in contemplating this market change, as we've seen consideration of this issue in New Jersey, in PJM on a wider basis, as well as in the Northeast. I want to thank you for your time this afternoon, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you. John Fiastro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. John Fiastro here on behalf of NRG. I'm not going to repeat what Mr. Leininger, Mr. Fitch said. What I will say, though, is this, is that here is the 2019 report for the state's renewable energy portfolio standard. And why do I bring it up today? This report was published in October by the Public Service Commission. It is a report on the compliance year of 2019. Under the program that we have currently today, any reporting for the renewable portfolio standard is retrospective in nature. So policymakers don't have the benefit when making policy to understand what the costs and implications are of that program. The bill before you today, the Forward Clean Energy Market Bill, is a forward procurement market. As it's contemplated, policymakers will have the opportunity to understand what the cost of a compliance year for our clean energy goals would be 3 years ahead of time. And so what does that do? Well, it really actually provides a benefit to policymakers, to stakeholders like this committee, so they can see what the costs and implications are of a portfolio standard. A forward procurement provides more certainty to developers and generation owners, and is a vehicle by which other interested parties interested in procuring clean energy credits would be able to enter. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. We ask for a favorable report on House Bill 220.
Any questions? Quick ones, Delegate Brooks, then Delegate Charkoudian.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chair. Mr. Fiastro, quickly on the, I was looking at the clean energy credit target dates. Now you're saying clean energy, so this is not renewable energy. Renewable energy is a part of that as well, with your generating your credits.
Sure, thank you, Delegate Brooks. Yes, I mean the bill does expand the number of qualifying technologies, but let's be very clear here. Our client is agnostic in terms of the technologies within the portfolio. What the real interest here is to change the procurement of RECs. See, under the current program, a retail supplier is required to match their sales with a percentage as laid out in the public utility article in the RPS. So let's assume a 50% compliance rate. If I sell 100 megawatt hours within Maryland within a compliance year, I will have to go out and procure 50 renewable energy credits. Okay. Now, what this bill does is actually allows me to bid that demand for 50 credits into a market in which a supplier can then answer the call for those credits. consolidated market. It's really, this bill does contemplate expansion. We know that conversation is one that we have every year here in the General Assembly hears every year what should be and should not be. The bill contemplates expansion, but really the most important part of this bill is changing the way electric suppliers go about procuring credits. And so
Okay.
I'm sure that we can talk about
Right.
sure we can talk about that further.
Okay, but that would include nuclear energy as well, right?
The bill is submitted includes nuclear.
Okay.
We have seen that in a few other bills. I think
Mhm.
the CARES Act last year had that, but this bill is less about nuclear and more about the procurement and retirement of RECs in a forward market.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Delegate Charkoudian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick question to Neil. Was NRG one of the 14 companies that signed on to the Calpine complaint to FERC that brought us the MOPR?
Thank you for your question, Delegate. That's accurate.
It was, okay. So NRG brought us the MOPR that has us all twisted in knots about how to protect consumers and keep our state's ability to set policy. And now you've got us the solution that we want us to trust is the right direction to go. Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
All right. Alec Pavlik. Is Mr. Pavlik with us? If not, Delegate Charkoudian, let's go to House Bill 1007.
Great. There was no one opposed to that though?
Mr. Pavlik.
Okay, I would have said more. Great. Well, let's do House Bill 1007. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, colleagues. I am thrilled to be presenting House Bill 1007. Delegate Lord Charkoudian for the record. And so this bill is the geothermal bill. This is geothermal REC carve out. So earlier in this session, I presented a bill that was about a study. That study will be subsumed into this bill if the committee decides to move this one forward instead. But in that conversation that we had earlier, I had a chance, along with a fabulous panel, many of whom you'll be hearing from now, to introduce this committee to and start talking about the geothermal heating and cooling technology. It's a pretty phenomenal technology. We have heating and cooling just 6 feet below our feet in the ground across the state. We talked about the technical side of it before. I know many of you have had a chance to meet with the Geothermal Association, and they'll be happy to answer some of the technical pieces as well. But really one of the challenges within, as we've discussed on this committee, is the thermal side of the energy system. And this is a clean energy technology, an emissions-free energy technology that addresses the thermal needs of buildings. And there's a couple things that are really important about it. In being a clean technology and being a technology that doesn't have emissions, that is really important both within the home because we're not burning any fossil fuel. There's no combustion in the home. So from a clean, healthy indoor air quality issue perspective, geothermal is really important for that from a health perspective, but it's also really important for the entire grid. And so right now, for example, we're looking at Texas struggling. And one of the things that happens, as I think everybody on the committee knows, but I'll take the moment to highlight, is when everybody turns their AC on at once. In Maryland, we're a summer peaking state. In Texas, normally they're summer peaking, but now they had a winter peak when everyone turned their heat on at once. The grid couldn't take it. Now, there's a bunch of things that were going on in Texas, but one of the things that we want to do is find ways to shave our peak use of energy. And geothermal is a peak shaving technology. So in addition to the individual homes that benefit from it, the individual businesses that benefit from it, the cleaner air quality, the lower emissions, the lower carbon across the state, all of that, we also have this broader resiliency impact. When we increase the amount of geothermal on the grid, we have greater resiliency of the entire grid. And that's a really important factor. So right now, let's talk about what this bill does. This bill right now, geothermal is in the general tier 1 arena. And so what that means is it's in there along with all of the other technologies that we've talked about, some of which we think in there, some of which some of us think should come out. What this bill does is it creates a small geothermal carve out that's similar to the solar carve out and offshore wind essentially carve out. And so what that does is it ensures that we are targeting some of the RECs to geothermal, to growing the geothermal industry. So that's what it does, and we can talk about the specifics of how that increases over time. But there's a few other things about the way that this bill does that I think are important. As I have said to this committee, I think it's really important that we incorporate equity into every single one of our clean energy statutes. And so this is an example of where from the get-go, we are, sorry, my internet's saying it's unstable. Can folks hear me okay? Can someone do it?
It's fine.
It's okay.
Yep.
So this is an example of a bill where from the get-go, we have within the REC carve out, we have a sub carve out. 25% of all of the RECs have to go to support low-income individuals. It could be low-income housing, multifamily or single family. It could be schools in low-income communities or high farm rates. It could be hospitals, other buildings that are primarily serving low-income individuals. And this is designed so that we have this broader concept of energy equity, but also so that when we talk about some of these additional benefits, like the indoor air quality issues, we're ensuring that those are being distributed across our population in a way that ensures that equity. So that's one piece that we have in this bill, and that I hope will also be a model for others of our clean energy bills. The second thing that is in this bill that I think is really important, and you'll be hearing from some of the labor unions coming up soon, is the labor standards. Again, really making sure we've had a lot of conversation on this committee about the transition. What does a just transition look like? How do we make sure that folks coming out of the fossil fuel industries have good jobs in the clean energy industries? And this is a really good example of how to do that. A lot of the pipeline jobs are similar in the geothermal world. And what we want to do is make sure that as we grow the geothermal technology, we're doing so with good wages, with good benefits, and with apprenticeships, so that we are, and so this bill requires on the larger projects that 10% of the people working on the project are apprentices. So it's ensuring this sort of ongoing career development. So I think this bill is really important. I still think there's more work that we need to do in the state to learn, understand, and incorporate and grow the geothermal industry. So I think what we ought to do is pass this bill, because it'll be a shot in the arm. It'll signal the market, it'll jumpstart and grow the use of geothermal. But as I said, we also have the study bill incorporated into this, because I think there are some other issues, some I gave examples of last time, like on-bill financing and other approaches that could make geothermal even more accessible to more people. And so I think that study is a really important piece of it. Finally, I will say that we do have some amendments. I know that there have been, just as we've built this bill, some of the questions that were raised by the Public Service Commission were pieces that we were amending anyways. They had to do with sort of drafting this language parallel to previous RPS language. So not all of them actually belong in this particular bill. So we can address those if folks have questions or concerns about anything that was in other folks' testimony. Many of them are issues that we already have amendments for, but of course, as always, I'm open to additional amendments. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll take questions, or we can hear from my panel, and then we can all take questions as you prefer.
Okay, yeah, we'll go down the list. Jeff Guido.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, and committee members. Jeff Guido on behalf of the Baltimore DC Building Trades Council. We support House Bill 1007. Geothermal heat pumps, also known as ground source heat pumps, the heat, cool, supply hot water to home, commercial building, warehouse, healthcare facility, any habitable structure by transferring heat to or from the ground. I mean, the pipe is buried to a depth where it stays at a pretty even temperature of around 55 degrees. So either heating or cooling from that point. You can cut your energy bills by 65%. Geothermal is not a new technology. It's been around for 50 years. The bill will expand the geothermal industry. It'll grow market for our contractors, for our apprenticeship opportunities, employmentship for our members. I mean, we specialize in this kind of work, and we would like to see more of it. And we ask the committee for a favorable report. Thank you.
Adam Santry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to provide comments today. I'm Adam Santry, President of the Maryland Geothermal Association, which represents over 30 residential and commercial well drillers and 100 HVAC installers and manufacturers. I'm also speaking to you today as the president of the geothermal drilling company, Allied Well Drilling, headquartered right here in Anne Arundel County. Allied is one of the top geothermal drillers in the country and employs more than 100 people locally. While most of our employees call Maryland home, most of our work has shifted to more competitive and out-of-state geothermal markets. Among its many benefits, House Bill 1007 will help us make Maryland a leader in geothermal development again by creating a REC carve-out in the Maryland RPS for geothermal heating and cooling projects developed in our state. Typically, the majority of utility bills are generated through heating and cooling. Geothermal technology makes the biggest positive impact on Maryland residents' utility bills and our state's energy goals. By including geothermal in the RPS, we will guarantee that all of our geothermal RECs are generated in state. This is especially important because currently 80% of RECs are generated out of state. All of our projects will be built in Maryland and directly benefit our state. The bill will ensure an equitable deployment of geothermal heat pumps by requiring that 25% of all projects benefit low and moderate income homeowners and communities across the state. The bill will provide high quality, high paying jobs in the state with family sustaining wages and benefits. Commercial projects will ensure that at least 10% of the employees working are enrolled in an apprenticeship program approved by and registered with the state or the federal government. In conclusion, this bill will provide the incentives we need to dramatically grow the geothermal market here in the state of Maryland and allow us to invest in the cleanest, most efficient, and cost-effective electrification technologies to benefit our economy, our environment, and all Marylanders, not just the top income earners. The Maryland Geothermal Association asks that you pass this important piece of legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Todd Travis.
Good afternoon. I'm Todd Travis, President and Chief Operating Officer of Foundation Housing. Foundation Housing is a 501c3 nonprofit established more than 30 years ago, committed to creating solutions to address our nation's affordable housing crisis. We operate in 23 states in the District of Columbia, but Maryland is our home state, and we are headquartered in Maryland as well. In the state of Maryland, Foundation Housing owns over 13 properties, and that represents more than 1,500 units. All of our communities owned by Foundation Housing meet the definition of low and moderate income housing as defined by this legislation. Foundation Housing strongly supports this legislation. Part of Foundation Housing's mission is to promote federal, state, and local policies that preserve and upgrade the existing inventory of our nation's assisted, affordable, multifamily housing. This legislation firmly advances our mission by creating a meaningful, dedicated funding source that will allow low and moderate income families to replace the antiquated boiler systems that are running off fuel and natural gas with a clean, efficient, environmentally friendly geothermal heat pumps. Replacing these outdated heating and cooling systems will generate or will reduce total energy bills by as much as 50%. To put that in perspective, that would save our average residents as much as $40 to $80 a month. Beyond the monetary benefits, replacing the fossil fuel powered heating and cooling system geothermal provides our residents with tangible health and comfort benefits. Fossil fuel systems increase the likelihood of fewer pollutants building up inside their residence. In conclusion, HB 1007 has the potential to make Maryland a national leader in installing geothermal heating and cooling systems in low and moderate income communities and can become a model for other states. We strongly support and our very favorable vote on this legislation. Thank you.
Gerald Jackson.
Good afternoon, Chairman Davis, Vice Chair Dumay, and committee members. My name is Gerald Jackson. I am the Secretary Treasurer for Maryland State and DC AFL-CIO under the leadership of Donna Edwards. I'm also the Assistant Business Manager at the Plumbers and Steamfitters Local 46 in Baltimore under the leadership of Business Manager Will Welsh. On behalf of the 2,500 members of the Plumbers and Steamfitters in Local 46, I'm asking for support for House Bill 1007. As we slowly transition away from fossil fuel to more renewable sources, we must consider its impact on our communities, the taxpayer base, and displaced workers. Maryland can lead the way on responsible expansion of clean energy by supporting legislation like House Bill 1007. Banning fossil fuel jobs is not the path forward. A lot of the workers in my industry are anxious about a transition. We must craft environmental policies that promote good paying, family sustaining jobs in the clean energy sector. We can reduce our reliance on fossil fuels while creating good paying jobs in the process, and we must do both. The language in this bill also encourages responsible contractors to lead the way in the expansion of green energy options and discourages unscrupulous contractors from procuring these projects. This legislation provides the protections needed for Maryland's next generation of geothermal installers. For these reasons, I ask for a favorable report of House Bill 1007. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Arun Makajani.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Arjun Makajani. I'm testifying on behalf of Energy Advocates. I'm the chair of Energy Advocates, which is a coalition for energy access and affordability by low-income families in Maryland. And also as president of the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research. I'm an electrical engineer. I'm in strong support of House Bill 1007, which would create specific targets for geothermal heating. It's already part of our renewable portfolio standard. Geothermal heating is by far the most efficient heating and cooling technology that we have. And so setting targets for this and promoting this technology in our state is very important, both for our greenhouse gas goals and for our economic goals. I'm also in support of this for other reasons. As you heard from Delegate Charkoudian, the compliance payment would go into the Strategic Energy Investment Fund to increase affordability of geothermal heating for low-income families. I think this is very important and an exemplary provision of this bill. Similarly, the provision for 25% of the compliance payments to directly help low-income families and neighborhoods get geothermal heating is very important. It was very important in our discussions in Energy Advocates about this bill. There are other strong reasons to support this in terms of its impacts on non-participants. I have a geothermal heat pump. It reduced my air conditioning demand by 3/4 in the summer. I estimate it saves about 2 kilowatts in peak load. And so basically the avoided investment is about $2,000. So my geothermal heat pump is actually saving non-participating ratepayers money. And I think there would be similar impacts in the winter because we are a summer peaking utility. I'd be happy to answer more technical questions about that. They are in my written testimony. I strongly urge a favorable report for House Bill 1007.
Mike Tidwell.
Thank you, Chairman Davis and Vice Chair Dumay and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Mike Tidwell, Executive Director of the Chesapeake Climate Action Network and CCAN Action Fund, here to urge strongly a favorable report on House Bill 1007. I believe that I've probably testified in front of this committee more than anyone else in the state on RPS policy over the years. worked with Chairman Davis all the way back in 2004 to pass the original RPS. And it has created literally tens of thousands of jobs in our state and cleaned up our air and made a sizable contribution to our fight against climate change. In fact, President Biden now is pointing to states like Maryland and others who've had these mandatory clean electricity standards that have been good for the economy, good for the environment. And the president is supporting 100% national RPS by 2035, again, based on the job creation and environmental successes that we've seen already in states like ours. So this is really important. The issue of geothermal is critical. You know, our RPS bills over the years, I think it's fair to say, have most incentivized wind and solar power, both offshore wind, land-based wind, utility scale solar, and residential solar. But the reality is, it is not easy to heat and cool homes and businesses and interior space with electricity. It's just tough to do that with wind and solar. And that's why we need geothermal. And I think a carve out for geothermal is frankly overdue in our RPS. I think the technology is there. I think the policy support needs to be there. And I think we're going to see the good paying jobs that our friends in labor have advocated for on this call. And you're going to see the vital improvement in our greenhouse gas emissions. So I don't know how we meet our state's greenhouse gas reduction goals without geothermal. I want to thank my delegate, Lord Charkoudian, for being the chief sponsor of this bill, and especially for incorporating environmental justice and labor features into this bill. So I want to urge a favorable report on HB 1007. Thank you.
Thank you. Stacey Hartwell.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, committee members, and colleagues. My name is Stacey Hartwell for the record. I am the co-chair of the NAACP Maryland State Conference Environmental and Climate Justice Committee. I would like to start by sharing a favorite aphorism. A rising tide lifts all boats. House Bill 1007 lifts all Marylanders. Limited income households, communities of color, and other disadvantaged communities stand to benefit even more from renewable energy deployment through energy bill reduction and improved public health outcomes, but often have the least access to the benefits of renewable energy programs. This bill would create incentive for more renewable deployment by including geothermal in our renewable portfolio standard. More importantly, it would ensure low and moderate income households are the beneficiaries of this addition by calling for 25% of the systems to be installed in homes and community centers that house and serve low and moderate income ratepayers. These income challenged Marylanders would be able to see the benefits and recoup the savings on their energy bills within 2 to 10 years through savings on their utilities. Maryland's low-income residents pay 550% more as a portion of their income for energy than non-low-income Marylanders. The majority of these households are Black, Hispanic, or Asian. COVID-19 has exacerbated this inquiry with over 209,000 residents in arrears in PEPCO and BGE territories. This bill, as you've heard, would also create and support a strong and growing geothermal industry that provides family-sustaining jobs as well as a sustainable planet. The bill calls for installers to provide healthcare, apprenticeship opportunities, as well as family-sustaining wages. For all these reasons, the NAACP Maryland State Conference urges a favorable report on House Bill 1007. By doing so, you will be prioritizing those needing support while providing a cleaner and safer environment to lift all Marylanders. Thank you.
Donald Gold.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry for the delay. Madam Vice Chair, my name is Donald Goldberg. I'm the Executive Director of Climate Law and Policy Project. I'd like to put my screen on. Sorry, I'm having a little iPad difficulty. Can you hear me? I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you, yes.
Okay, I'm just going to make one quick point. Many of the points I was going to make have already been covered, so no need to repeat them. I just want to mention the fact that Maryland has a robust plan to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions that entails moving towards electrifying all of our sectors and cleaning up our grid. Most of the studies I've seen suggest that the most difficult part of that is going to be achieving the final 20 to 30% of decarbonizing our grid. One of the best things I think we can do to make that goal reachable is to adopt the most efficient heating and cooling systems available to us. And of course, that we know is geothermal. So I think that in itself is a very important reason to pass this bill. But I also want to mention that in the past, we know that our energy programs in the state haven't been very equitable, and this bill goes a long way to correcting that. So I urge that you give it a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Rick Benetti, followed by Aaron Appel.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Rick Benetti, for the record, here on behalf of Lyona's Baltimore Washington District Council. I think literally everything I was going to say has been already mentioned, so I'll be short and sweet, and I'll just make the point again that in whatever form it takes, a transition to greener energy in Maryland must include a blueprint for the transition of meaningful employment as well. Bills like this one that leverage RPS credits to create labor standards in growing industries will ensure that building trades jobs and the environment are equally important as Maryland continues to develop effective clean energy policies. With that, I will just say that Lyona's 7,400 members in the Baltimore, Washington area urge a favorable report on House Bill 1007. And I also want to thank the leadership, the sponsor for her leadership, and the folks at the Maryland Geothermal Association for their leadership and willingness to work with us on this bill. Thank you.
Aaron Appel.
Great. Good afternoon, Chairman and members. For the record, Aaron Appel on behalf of the Maryland Geothermal Association. I want to begin by sincerely thanking the bill sponsor. We've worked closely with Delegate Charkoudian over the past 9 months to craft a bill that seeks not only to grow geothermal in Maryland, but to do so in a way that truly makes it accessible to all Marylanders, grows high quality, high paying jobs, and helps our state achieve its RPS goals in the most efficient and cost-effective manner possible. The bill that you see before you is the culmination of those efforts. I think you'll see from the list of proponents here today, including the small business members of our industry, labor representatives, low and moderate income advocates, and environmental groups, that this bill achieves these goals. We have Maryland-based geothermal companies currently going out of state to conduct large-scale installations. These are huge and labor-intensive projects, many of them low-income multifamily housing projects that are installing geothermal. These companies should be doing that work right here in Maryland. Schools in particular stand to benefit greatly under this bill. All schools, not just those in the wealthiest school districts. Right now, life cycle analyses are conducted on schools prior to their being constructed or retrofitted. One I saw recently for a local middle school shows a payback of 7 years and 16 million in savings over the 30-year life cycle. Those are huge savings, and yet the local jurisdiction may choose not to install geo because they simply can't afford the upfront costs. This bill would allow them to do so. The same goes for middle-class families who want to install geothermal. Right now, they likely can't afford the upfront costs. This bill would create a means for them to do so by allowing them to save money from day one. In closing, geothermal is a key piece of the renewable puzzle. It will allow us to stop relying on RECs generated out of state to meet our renewable energy goals, and it will ensure that all Marylanders benefit from its growth. I ask for your support for this very good bill. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We'll go to Ian Reinhardt, and he'll be followed by William Kress, and Amanda Best.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Ian Reinhardt, and I'm a principal at the Ad Hoc Group, which is a firm that advises climate tech and sustainability-focused businesses. Today, I'll be speaking on behalf of Dandelion Energy, who's the #1 residential installer of geothermal heat pumps. I can tell you that Dandelion strongly supports this bill. Dandelion's not in Maryland today, but if this were to pass, Dandelion would take action to enter the Maryland market and open a warehouse in the state. This would include hiring HVAC installers and geothermal drillers, as we've done to date in states like New York and Connecticut, where we operate. Dandelion's goal, has been discussed, is to democratize geothermal and make it affordable and accessible for any homeowner by driving down the costs at scale. And the state incentives are a critical piece of the puzzle. Installing geothermal is both an environmental and an economic decision for homeowners. And with the proper state incentives, like the ones contemplated in this bill, Dandelion can offer middle-class homeowners the option to finance a system and see those savings on day one. And this is really what's opened the market in states like New York and Connecticut. Others have discussed energy savings. We similarly see $1,500 to $2,000 a year or more in total energy bill reduction. And similarly, there's a study by the Brattle Group, which recently found in Maryland that each geothermal installation would reduce peak system costs on the grid by about $180 per year because the system maintains its efficiency even during the hottest and the coldest days of the year. In conclusion, the incentives, such as those provided by this bill, would have an immediate and material impact on the Maryland market, allowing Dandelion and others to enter and begin serving middle-class homeowners and providing them clean, efficient geothermal. Thank you.
William Kress. Amanda Best.
Good afternoon, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Dumais, and committee members. I'm Amanda Best, Senior Commission Advisor at the Maryland Public Service Commission. I'm here today to testify on House Bill 1007. I just want to make clear that the Commission does not oppose the concept of a Tier 1 carve-out for geothermal systems under the RPS. I'm really just here to highlight several technical concerns we've identified with our role in overseeing compliance with and implementation of the bill. Two issues are related to ensuring compliance with the law. The Commission may have difficulty determining if a system meets the low income and employee requirements for certain systems, particularly the issues related to employment, salary, and benefits, as we do not currently have the expertise in these matters. Three issues are related to current resources available at the Commission. We would need to hire consultants and additional staff to develop the regulations, conduct the 2 reports due in 2020 and 2021, and conduct the engineering analyses for non-residential systems required by this bill, as the Commission does not currently have the resources to do so. One final concern is related to meeting the goals of the geothermal carve-out created by House Bill 1007. Based on historical data, geothermal renewable energy credits represent a small number of Tier 1 RECs retired in compliance with the RPS. To meet the 1% carve-out by 2026, an increase of 278% would be required from 2020 levels. With that, the PSC respectfully requests an unfavorable report on House Bill 1007, and I thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes our hearing on House Bill 1007. I'd now like to go to House Bill 1304, Delegate Frazier Hildal.
Hello, members of the committee, Chair and Vice Chair. Thank you so much for having me. I do have to open this with an apology. I thought last week was going to be my only 2 bills before your committee, and I said so. And now I find myself before you here once more time. So I do apologize for that. Here, Delegate David Frazier Hidalgo here to introduce House Bill 1304. This bill, similar to many of my other bills that you've heard, is really just about leveling the playing field. We have a case where peer-to-peer car sharing is not being held at the same level or the same standard as rental car companies, particularly in BWI at BWI Airport when it comes to contracting. This is something that I think this committee and the General Assembly addressed in 2017. Fortunately, it hasn't come to fruition to completely level that playing field. So this bill attempts to do that exact thing, to level the playing field so that whether you're working at a BWI airport and you're a traditional rental car company or you're a peer-to-peer service, everybody's treated the same and everybody gets the same shot at the same contracts with BWI to ensure that everybody has the same opportunity to compete. And with that said, it's really that simple. I'd love to kick it to the other advocates I have on my panel, if that's all right with you, Mr. Chair.
Yep. Andy Dollo.
Yeah. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair. I'm Andy Dolliff, Vice President and General Manager at Enterprise Holdings, overseeing Baltimore and the majority of our Maryland locations, including BWI Airport. In the slide deck, you will see kind of our impact on the state of Maryland. We employ 2,000 Marylanders. Our payroll generates about $6 million in payroll taxes. We pay about $1 million in property tax, $4 million in vehicle registrations, and contribute about $63 million in sales tax, rental excise tax, and BWI concession fees. I say all that just to simply say we are a very good Maryland business and do our part here in the state of Maryland. As Delegate described, this is a very simple bill. At the end of the day, the reason we are focused on this bill is the rental car center at BWI is a closed market rental system. Everybody pays the same fees, pays the same surcharges, pays the same taxes to rent a vehicle at BWI. What we're trying to do is seek that same economic parity when people rent a car at BWI Airport. Everybody would obviously like access to the curb in the rental car industry, whether it be us at Enterprise, Hertz, or Avis. Those are simply not the rules in renting a car at the airport. In fact, because our peer-to-peer operators continue to operate that way, they were given a cease and desist order by the Maryland Aviation Administration and failed to honor that request. So at the end of the day, this is very simple. If everybody's renting a vehicle for $40 a day for 3 days at BWI Airport, everybody should end up at the same price point at the end of the day. Our customers choose the vehicle before they fly into Maryland, fly into BWI, and oftentimes they sort the pricing based on the total price. They may choose a vendor or they may choose a type of car based on total price. And all we're looking to do in this bill is to make sure that that total price is the exact same based on the rate that we're charged. So appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Michael Johansson, followed by Michael De Lorenzo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Mike Johansson on behalf of Enterprise. Andy gave a good description of the business terms at the airport. Let me also suggest that this really is something that's based on the construct of the airport as being a consolidated facility. None of the 9 or 10 rental car companies that operate at the airport are allowed to pick up at the curb, and they can't conduct business in the hourly parking garage across the street. In fact, those were the arrangements made more than 20 years ago when the airport asked the rental car companies to enter into long-term contracts to move off-site. The promises that were made at the time 20 years ago even specifically prohibited off-airport rental car operators from picking up customers at the curb. In fact, they are only allowed to pick up customers from the consolidated facility. So everybody that flies into BWI, goes to a website before they take off, and by the time they land and pick up their bags, everybody takes the shuttle bus over to the consolidated facility, and they either conduct business with one of the 9 or 10 operators in the building, or they get on a bus and go to an off-airport rental company. We've been talking to the Maryland Aviation Administration ever since the General Assembly authorized peer-to-peer operators. We'd like to help them get to a point where everybody is under a concession agreement. And we think this bill gives a little bit more structure to the Maryland law so that the Aviation Administration can adopt the appropriate COMAR regulations. Finally, as rental car companies, we have a provision in our agreements that simply says the airport can't enter into any future concession agreements for like services. It doesn't say rental car services. It says for like services on terms that are better than ours. And we think this bill is just a better structure to get the airport to follow through with the next round of concession agreements. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. De Lorenzo.
Good afternoon, delegates. I'm Mike DiLorenzo, and I run the local Maryland company, Next Car Rental and Leasing. We were founded in Maryland by Maryland residents. I have 120 employees working at 17 rental stores in the Baltimore, Washington, Annapolis, Frederick marketplace. We are also part of the Fitzgerald Automotive Group. The guys have already said most of the things I was going to bring up, that all we're looking for here is fairness. We want one set of rules for everybody to play by. And I've been held to all these rules in my 52 years of renting cars to Maryland residents. And it would just seem to me as unfair for an out-of-state website company from California, a big tech firm, to not be held to the same rules that me, a Maryland company, spent my whole life doing this, are being held to. There is a rental car facility available at BWI Airport. It's under competitive bid. If any peer-to-peer car sharing company wants to go in terminal at BWI, all they have to do is bid on it, just like I was forced to do to get in terminal at BWI Airport 4 or 5 years ago. So that's really all that I have to say. I did send you all an email at 1:33 p.m. from Mike at NP Auto Group that contains a chart explaining about the car rental taxes that we actually do pay. There's a lot of story going around that car rental doesn't pay excise taxes. We don't. We pay car rental taxes. And my chart will show you that a rental car generates $7,800 in tax compared to a new car sold last year will generate $2,200 in tax. So we do pay our fair share of tax. It's just not called excise tax. That's all. It's called car rental tax. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Rob Garagiola, followed by Sean Malone.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Rob Garagiola with Compass on behalf of both Nextcar and Enterprise. Appreciate the opportunity to be here and thank Delegate David Fraser Hidalgo for sponsoring the legislation. I didn't bring, the airplanes and the cars for the benefit of the committee, but I do want to try to simplify this issue for folks. We've dealt with these issues many times. We've dealt with them with Airbnb and hotels. When there's new technology, we've also dealt with them at the airport with respect to Uber and Lyft and taxis. Several years ago, we passed legislation in Maryland seeking to bring parity to peer-to-peer and rental cars. This bill, I think, finishes the job for that with respect to the airport and ensuring there's parity. I think the bottom line for the committee to consider as a policy consideration is if you have someone flying in from Oklahoma into BWI, they're getting on their phone and they're either going on Enterprises or Alamo or Nextcar or Turo or Get Around, and they're essentially renting a car, whether it's on a peer-to-peer platform or it's with a traditional rental car company. And the thing is if you do that, and I did that earlier today just to see the price differential, there is a substantial price differential in renting a car from a peer-to-peer operator at the airport versus a traditional rental car company. As was mentioned earlier, there's a chart that's been submitted on behalf of Enterprise that I'd like to direct you to that Andy Dollop touched on. So if you're flying in from Oklahoma and you get on your phone and you do a peer-to-peer, you're not going to be paying the same concession fee that the rental car companies pay. You're not going to be paying the customer facility charge, the shuttle bus charge, or even the same sales tax. It's 11.5% for rental car companies. It's 8% for peer-to-peer. That is a $42 difference for a 3-day rental that the customer for peer-to-peer operators are not paying. And furthermore, it's money left on the table for the state of Maryland and the Transportation Trust Fund. The MAA would lose approximately $26 in that scenario, And the state sales tax losses would be about 8. So with that, Mr. Chairman, would urge support for this legislation to finish the job of bringing parity to the peer-to-peer operators that the rental car companies experience. Thank you, and happy to answer any questions.
Tom Malone, followed by Chris DePietro.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of Turo, my name is Sean Malone, testifying opposition to House Bill 1304, which seeks to limit the ability of the Maryland Aviation Administration to contract with peer-to-peer car sharing companies and impose conditions upon peer-to-peer companies on how they can enter an agreement with an airport. Peer-to-peer and car rental industries are engaged in a national fight playing out in state legislatures, similar to the battles this committee has seen with regard to taxi cabs and Uber, hotels, and Airbnb. As technology evolves, marketplace disruptors introduce different business models to provide services to the public. This evolution of the economy is encouraged by a free market system. This bill is a reaction of a traditional industry seeking to restrain the growth of an emerging industry. MMA is a sophisticated entity that's created a vibrant BWI marketplace, offering amenities to customers. I've represented many clients at the airport, negotiating for clear off-site parking vendors and restaurants. On behalf of Turo, in compliance with 2018 legislation, I negotiated an agreement with the MMA for peer-to-peer operate the airport. The airport even secret shopped us to make sure the service was a value add. The contract was finalized between the parties, was set to go to BPW, and the day before was pulled because of the opposition from a rental car industry. The rental car industry negotiated a deal that fit their business model. No third party interfered in their negotiation. The legislature did not dictate the terms. This bill, in unprecedented fashion, seeks to place rental car companies at the table in negotiation to a contract to which they have no privity. Their master agreement is up soon. If they like our contract, they should work for those terms. Restricting commercial speech, interfering with how our company advertises, dictating parity clauses, mandating fees, and attempting to regulate transaction conducted by at an offsite at the request of the lending industry is overly burdensome. In closing, both sides have engaged passionate advocates in Maryland. The debate's been robust. However, we recognize there is fatigue with this issue. Mr. Johansson and I are dedicated to working through this and creating a framework for both industries. Thank you.
Chris DePietro, followed by Sean Vick.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Chris DePietro. I'm here on behalf of Turo. We respectfully request an unfavorable report on this bill. I think Sean kind of laid out the issues we have with the bill, but I think it's really important for the committee to understand the timeline here and how we are where we are today. So in 2018, as you all remember, this committee was instrumental in passing the first comprehensive bill regulating the peer-to-peer car sharing industry in the country. As part of that legislation, a provision was inserted at the request of the traditional car rental industry, which we accepted, that said that if we were to do business at the airport, the peer-to-peer industry was to do business at the airport, that we would have to do so under a concession agreement. And that's fair, and we agree with that. So when the bill was signed by the governor in 2018, went into effect in July 1st of 2018, we reached out to BWI to start the discussions to enter into that very concession agreement that the legislation that you all passed required. It took 2 years to negotiate this contract. So I'm not going to say it was a short amount of time. It took a while. But part of that was because, as Sean mentioned, unbeknownst to us, the airport did some secret shopping. They wanted to see how these transactions actually worked in the real world. They wanted to see what the impact was on airport facilities and how they functioned in the marketplace if it was a value add to the consumers flying in and out of BWI. So to their satisfaction, after that experience, we sat down and we negotiated, we continued the negotiations and came up with a concession agreement that was fair to both sides, that was appropriate for the business model that we are. We don't use, we have no need to use the consolidated rental facility or any of it. We don't have employees, and I know people will bring that up. We don't have employees in the state, so we have no need for a counter. So to be very quick about it, it went onto the Board of Public Works agenda in early December. It was agreed to by the parties in July of 2020, went on in December of 2020. Then it became public. And that's when the car rental industry kind of went a little nuts over it and started lobbying very hard against the contract. The MMA decided to pull the contract from the consideration, and we are where we are now because with this bill, we talk about fairness, and I think I understand why the sponsor of the bill is saying that they're seeking fairness, but you have to look at it from our angle. We did what you guys wanted us to do. We negotiated fairly a contract that was appropriate for this industry, and it was pulled out. And now they want to change the rules of the road for us. So with that, we do ask for an unfavorable report. Thank you. Sean Vink is here at our request. He is from Toro, and he's here to answer questions and might make a few comments about the bill. Thank you.
Is he going to testify?
He's available for questions if anybody has them. He's an attorney with Toro.
Delegate Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few questions. I guess I'll start with either Chris or Sean. When we talk about Turo specifically, I know that that's not the only peer-to-peer ride sharing that we have, but just from Turo, what percentage of your market are individuals that own 5 or more cars?
I don't have that specific number for you, but I can tell you from past testimony and past years when we've looked at this, very small. There are folks that are either what we consider to be small mom and pop traditional car rental companies that use our platform to market their vehicles, but we treat them just like a car rental company.
And I say all that because obviously this is not the only issue that you guys are fighting right now.
No, unfortunately not. We have a two-front war here.
Right. I'm involved in both of those. And
yes, you are.
On Turo yesterday, I ran into multiple individuals with 50 or more cars, many doing business with used car sales, used car lots, basically leasing out these cars until they're sold. And I would like that information because it would, I was being sold, not a bill of goods, but basically under the influence that Turo was this, extra money kind of gig. But what I'm finding out, it also is a strong business model for individuals who own 50, 60, and 80 cars. So what I would personally like from either of you is that market share. Show me which of your individuals are mom and pop stores versus the individuals that are actually, doing this as a sole business model.
And again, Delegate, and we'll try to get you that information. But just to be clear, when those mom and pops do list on our site as a marketing tool, we do treat them the same as a car rental company.
Oh, no, I understand you do, but we may not be able to. And that's what I'm trying to find out. And secondly, Rob, because I'm looking here, I just want to make sure I understand this, because this was negotiated in 2018, right? This agreement that we're trying to nullify now, correct?
No, so in 2017, there was legislation put forward
18.
that 18, okay,
It's
but whatever the year was. A few years ago, there was legislation that was enacted that addressed essentially, we thought addressed this issue, frankly, with the airport and getting parity. It did not address the other issue that you mentioned and that Chris mentioned is in the two-front war on that sales tax, which we also think should be equal at the airport, regardless of platform. It should be 11.5% across the board. We thought the legislation addressed airport parity in 2018. Apparently, it hasn't. And we're hopeful that with this legislation that Delegate Fraser Hidalgo is sponsoring this before the committee, that will kind of memorialize what we thought was established a few years ago.
Well,
bottom line is the consumers, from a consumer perspective, someone flying out of state, it should be on level playing field.
Well, and that's why I'll say all around, and I'd ask you to get me some information as well, because to my understanding, peer-to-peer pays 6% titling fee plus another 8% transaction fee, which equals 14%, whereas the rental only pays the 11.5% transaction fee. And I ran the numbers on a $30,000 car, and basically year one, peer-to-peer will pay $34,000 in taxes, whereas an Avis or whatever would pay $3,400 versus $2,300. Basically, I know these are two separate bills, but I would dearly like to work on them together as best we can, because there are, I believe you're getting a great benefit via taxes, but also I think maybe the issue with the parking and all that can be resolved together. You mean give a little, take a little. So if you could contact me when this is all said and done too, because I want to make sure from the background information I've gotten and researched, I just want to make sure that I'm understanding what you guys are asking on both fronts, because we have to solve both of these this year, if possible.
We'd like to.
Right.
Delegate, and just so that the committee knows, Mr. Johansson and I have exchanged initial offers. We've had conversations, and we're committed to working through these issues as far as we can. And then there's going to be some decisions probably the legislature just has to make where Mike and I can't commit our companies to.
And to be honest, as I've told you before, Sean, I appreciate the negotiation you guys do, but since we're the one that will be held to the vote, we're going to be the one to actually make that final decision. So any information you can get
Fully
is great.
understand it.
I did not recognize you, Sean. You've aged quite a bit. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Delegate.
All right. That is the witness list for House Bill 1304. So that's the agenda for today. I'd like to thank everyone, particularly our guests who testified for a great day of bill hearings, and have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.